Chapter 1. The one, the only, the useless, sensational Muzutafu cryptid of minor inconveniences, Deku. Izuku Midoriya was nothing special. He got his quirk when he was 4, just like the rest of his classmates. It was almost identical to his mother's, an emitter that could lift up to 15 ounces. Granted, it was more telekinetic than just simple attraction, but it was also comically underpowered. A pretty dull quirk. He was, by and large, average. Still, Izuku was nothing if not dead set on becoming a hero. But with a weak telekinesis quirk like this mother's, what could he possibly do? Well, a lot it turned out. As Kakin had soon discovered, wearing anything with shoelaces was as good as shooting himself in the foot when it came to messing with Izuku. It was just so easy to tie them up with a thought. And God forbid any kid try making fun of him on the playground when he could lift some sand off the ground and shove it in their mouth or eyes. The teachers tended to look the other way for Izuku, too, since he was always so good about picking up trash around the school with a simple use of his quirk, passing out assignments all at once, and telekinetically delivering papers to the copying machine down the hall. Yes, Izuku, or Deku as he proudly called himself, was as useless as could be, but he was the little menace of Aldera. Begrudgingly liked as the de facto class clown and somehow also the teacher's pet, and that suited him just fine. And those were just the harmless uses for his quirk. Never mind the theories of drawing out 15 ounces of blood from a wound on someone's head, forcing permanent brain damage, or severing the optic nerves, or paralyzing them by snapping the nerves in their spinal cord. Nope, Izuku was perfectly, happily useless and mostly harmless. 0. He was also somewhat of a cryptid. Case in point, Sensei tripping as he made his way into the door of their class. "Fuck you, Deku," he muttered to himself before quickly covering his mouth. The rest of the class snickered. The man sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck. "Oh man, no one tell another teacher I said that. That would be my third write-up. Sorry about that, Midoriya." Izuku just waved him off good-naturedly. "It's fine, Sensei." Being known for tripping people up and pulling small pranks had sort of turned Izuku into the mishap cryptid of Aldera. Anyone who tripped or experienced a small inconvenience were quick to check over their shoulders for a fluffy head of green hair, a string of curses at the ready. It had become somewhat of a joke around the school, and also a challenge to see how many teachers they could rope into accidentally saying it. "The count's what now?" Tsubasa laughed from beside Izuku, a small smirk on his face. "6 teachers? Little shit's a menace." Bakuga huffed, crossing his arms and trying to put on a tough guy act. Even if that was a little lost when Izuku caught him quickly glancing down at his shoes again. They'd been switched out for loafers without laces, something Bakuga had only done surprisingly recently. But Izuku supposed that the boy saw that as admitting defeat, but that hadn't stopped his Deku instincts from pinging like a goddamn radar. Izuku smiled brightly at his childhood friend. A pure, bright expression that perfectly hid the little shit Bakuga knew he was. "Thanks, Kakin," he chirped. It was a nickname that Bakuga would have kicked his ass over had Izuku not more or less Pavloved him. There's only so many faceplants someone can take before they start putting the pieces together, whether they were aware of it or not. Izuku had a hunch that Katsuki hadn't quite caught on to the fact that he'd been trained. A cough at the front of the room drew his attention away. "Right, well," their sensei said, "Midoriya, I know you didn't do it." Izuku nodded, green hair bouncing and hands clasped far too cutely for the gremlin of Aldera. "I know you know, sensei." "Moving on, then," he said as he dug a slip of paper from the pile of them on his desk. "Mind if you send this paper down to the copier?" Izuku cheerily plucked the paper from his sensei's hand with an easy push of his quirk. The thing was folded into a paper airplane mid-air to the amusement of his classmates and soared over their heads, poking into Kakin's temple before merrily soaring out of the boy's angry grasp and fluttering out the window. Like Izuku had planned, it had garnered another round of groans and laughs from his classmates. He loved making people smile, and if it was at the expense of Kakin, even better. "Damn it, Deku," the angry blonde shouted, rubbing his head as if it actually hurt. Although it could just have easily been from the boy's burgeoning, Deku-shaped headache. But instead of protesting further or attacking, he just put his arms on his desk and shoved his face into them. His next words were muffled. I'm not dealing with this. Wake me up when class is over. Izuku reached over and patted the boy on his spiky, surprisingly soft hair. From his pocket, he pulled out a small chocolate bar and put it on Kaken's desk. After a few seconds, without looking up, a hand reached out and quickly snatched it up, pulling it behind his arms. He really wondered when the boy would finally figure out he was feeding him treats for good behavior. Sensei was tooting, and Izuku turned back around to give him a curious look. Midoriya, you know you are not supposed to antagonize your classmates. Teacher who allows illegal quirk use says what? Samato Shoji, the other teacher's pet in the class, a girl with 2 black braids and glasses, shot from her desk, hand raised, and shouted, Sensei, it's a trap. What? Then, a moment later, a shadow came over their teacher's eyes, failure and shame obvious. Damn it, Sensei hissed. Ha, gotcha. But before the man could rebuke Izuku anymore, the boy felt a twinge coming from his quirk and quickly brought the newly finished copies back up from the staff room. They flew through the window and came together in a neat little stack which Sensei took in his hands. Oh, thank you, he said. Not done yet. Midoriya cut in. The whole stack went over his ounce limit just a little too much. But Izuku wasn't fazed. He knew by now how to get the most bang for his buck. Just a few seconds later and the last few papers came in, did a little dance around Sensei before settling into his teacher's hands. He nodded, satisfied, then leaned back in his desk. Okay, now I'm done. His teacher looked skeptical, as if expecting more papers to fly from the windows or vents or under the door any moment now and smack him in the face. Which was stupid. Izuku wouldn't do that. Not for a 3rd time in a row anyways. When that didn't happen, the teacher finally straightened up and got to business. All right, now I've got some career forms here. But I know you all want to be heroes. That got cheers from the class, and even Katsuki got back up from his sulking again, chocolate bar half stuff in his mouth, and making his declaration of victory somewhat ridiculous. Above Izuku, little sticky notes folded themselves into letters, spelling out his hero name. The useless hero, Deku. They paraded around the room with Izuku's Bluetooth speaker levitating from his backpack and leading the charge. With a tap on Izuku's phone, hidden under his desk, it began triumphantly playing the All Might Adventures cartoon series theme song. It was absolutely stupid and ridiculous. It made people laugh and brought a smile to the faces of all the other kids with weak quirks. And really, wasn't that the kind of hero he was trying to be? Chapter 2. Vigilantism, Lunchboxes, and a really bad pep talk. Chapter text. Things sort of went off plan when an escaped bucket of Nickelodeon slime tried to kill him on his way home from school. But no matter, Izuku may only be able to move around 15 ounces at once, but that still hurt like a bitch if he targets the eyes. A little bit of tugging and pushing at those gross eyeballs, and the guy had to back off or risk early onset glaucoma. Another little push of his quirk, his backpack unzipped, and then he dug around for his lunchbox. He had to empty it of stuff first before it was light enough where he could levitate the thing. But once he did, it was trivial work snatching up the eyes and teeth of the villain in the box from a distance. The rest of the slime was forced to follow those very important organs, and with a resounding click, the entire thing snapped shut and the villain was trapped in the bright yellow and blue plastic container. It ungracefully fell to the ground shortly after, being just a little too heavy for him to float. Inside, he could hear quite a lot of angry burbles. Well, Izuku said shortly. He shoved his hands in his pockets and looked down at the villain consideringly. Does this make me an illegal vigilante? I guess I can claim school corruption? I'm just an impressionable youth, after all. How should I know better when my school lets me do this kind of stuff? I don't think ignorance is a viable defense in court, young man. Izuku jumped back, hands flailing as he nearly fell back from shock. Gah! Then his eyes went wide as he realized just who had barged in out of the sewers. All Might, what are you doing here? There the man stood tall, in his 7-foot form, broad, intimidating, and very cool looking with his hands on his hips. At least in Izuku's opinion. He was somewhat of a hero fanboy. I was chasing a villain, but have no fear because I am here. Izuku blinked once, twice. Then, so, You want the lunchbox? And how about self-defense? All Might gave a hearty laugh as he leaned down to pick up the lunchbox. That will, in fact, hold up better in court. However, I see no need to report this, as long as it's just a one-off incident. Izuka nodded. Ah, cool. Thanks. Then, just as All Might was about to bound away, he realized something. Ah, wait. All Might, sir? He reached out to grab onto his pants leg, just to catch his attention, but then the hero was jumping and Izuku was screaming as they went soaring across the city. All Might looked down at him in surprise, then seemed to flounder some as he tried to deal with having a young teen hugging onto his leg, one who was looking half terrified and half like he was on the best roller coaster of his life. Kid, you shouldn't be up here. No dip, Izuku screamed back. I can't just let go now. The number one hero at least had the decency to rub his two brain cells together and look embarrassed. Oh, right. I will find a rooftop then, he said with far too much bravado. Oh, he's a dork, Izuku realized. But that was fine because he was a dork too. As soon as they landed, Izuku huffed, doubling over to catch his breath. Can I ask what was so important that you grabbed onto me, young man? All Might asked. Through loud, slightly exaggerated breaths, Izuku held up one finger and said, 2 questions. 1. Huff. Can I? Huff. Can I be a? Oh my god, I'm going to vomit. Huff. A hero with a useless quirk. He wheezed out. He was pretty sure he'd do it either way, with or without the number one's opinion. But he couldn't just waste this chance and not ask. When he finally looked up, All Might was looking at him expectantly. Well, son, what is your quirk? You got the villain in a lunchbox of all things. After all, it can't be too shabby. It's weak telekinesis. I can lift up and move as many objects as I can focus on as long as the combined weight isn't over 15 ounces. All Might cocked his head to the side, placing his chin in his hand thoughtfully. Well, I've got this old buddy, David Shield, and channeling his nerdiness, I can assure you that 15 ounces of telekinesis isn't useless. I mean, you could totally mess up someone's eyes. Then he gave Izuku a beaming grin as if he'd just promoted popcorn sales for the Boy Scouts and not encouraged Izuku to go after someone's eyes. Izuku grinned, even out of breath, and spread his arms out in animated gestures. Because man, was it cool to have his favorite hero theorize even a little about his quirk and even say it could be of use. That's what I keep thinking. I mean, not actually messing with someone's eyes, not permanently, but like, glaucoma's just the worst. The hero nodded sagely. Indeed, the worst. Well then, Younga. Midoriya. He offered, brightly. Midoriya, you may never become one of the awe-inspiring heroes of the top 10, or even top 50, or 100. Geez. Okay, maybe not as cool. But you can probably be a hero. But still nice. Kinda? Thanks. Izuku shrugged, I guess. All Might nodded, satisfied. Right. Well then, what is the other question? And could you please hurry? Green Eyes squinted across the rooftop. Was that steam coming off the hero? Izuku quirked one eyebrow, but regardless, did as asked. Rushing through his words, he said, that lunchbox is a limited edition All Might-themed item. He admitted, a little embarrassed, which was kind of surprising. When was the last time he'd had any shame? He sort of sold out all his shame when becoming the cryptid of Aldera. So, if it's not too much of an inconvenience, can you drop the villain off with the cops then give it back? All Might seemed similarly flustered, although quickly put his trademark smile back into place. I see no problem with that. In fact, I'll return your lunchbox right now and just shove the villain into a bottle. I've got one with me right now, actually. I'll even sign your box for the trouble I put you through by jumping up here. Now let's see, where is it? As All Might checked his pockets, he seemed to get a little flustered, then downright panicked. More and more steam seemed to be rolling off him. All Might, what's going on? Izuku asked, nervous. The man seemed to visibly sweat as he patted his legs down more frantically. I might have What? His signature hero grin turned into a grimace. I might have lost the lunchbox with the villain in it. Izuku gaped. At the very same time, an explosion erupted off in the distance. Izuku whirled around to face it, eyes as wide as saucers. That can't be good. A few angry, loud, and familiar sludgy gurgles punctuated his statement. Izuku hesitantly walked up to the edge of the rooftop and squinted into the distance before feebly suggesting, "What do you think the chances are that that's not our escaped slime villain and just a totally different, unrelated one?" All Might joined Izuku by the railing and grimaced. "Not good, my boy. Not good. I have never had good odds." Then, as if in beautiful, karmic emphasis, All Might puffed up in a pathetic cloud of steam and turned into a scrawny scarecrow right before Midoriya Izuku's eyes. The stranger in front of him looked from his own form to a gobsmacked Izuku, and then to the explosion in the distance. Blood spewed out of his mouth not a moment later. Crap. Chapter 3, Interstage Left, Enabler All Might. Starring his internal bleeding. Chapter text. Both of them went running down the stairwell 3 steps at a time, as All Might gave Izuku a very abridged version of why he's actually All Might and not an imposter. Something something evil villain, something something government cover-up, something something terrible, debilitating injury, something something retirement is the bane of my existence. Whatever the case, Izuku and Small Might went barreling together out the office building with security hot on their trail and a lot of confused workers staring after them. They had a villain and a, hopefully, undestroyed limited edition lunchbox to find. "This way," Izuku called out, tugging on All Might's baggy shirt and jerking him in the right direction. "Right." The man went stumbling after him, and they made it halfway to where the battle was before he started wheezing and coughing up more blood. Izuku didn't even give the man a choice as he heaved all 7 feet of him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. It looked extremely comical from the short, round-faced, fluffy-haired boy who was all of 5 feet and 4 inches tall. But he was fit, not crazy ripped, but he couldn't just be a pudgy couch potato and expect to get into the hero course with a quirk like his. "What the? Calm down and stop spitting up blood," Izuku cried, internally half hysteric although immensely proud at how determined he sounded. His voice brokered no argument. "I'm using my telekinesis on you to stem the internal bleeding. So don't move, Small Might." All Might looked absolutely disbelieving. "Small Might? Also, young man, I find it very concerning that you're attempting to treat internal bleeding." "Don't worry. I've studied human anatomy already in the case I had to use someone's circulatory or nervous system against them. That is even more concerning." Their banter quickly came to a stop as they reached the place of the battle. Izuku watched with wide eyes as he saw Hino Yuza, a girl from his class, engulfed in the massive tower of sludge as a hostage. Her hands struggled to the surface, letting out bursts of flame in her panic that only warded off the heroes. Then, in the next instant, Izuku was tossed over and slammed on his back as All Might. For as much as he looked like a scarecrow right then, nimbly used his weight and height against Izuku to get back on his feet and send the boy crashing to the ground. Izuku wheezed, more out of shock than pain. The #1 hero had done a good job controlling his strength. He picked his head up off the ground and stared at All Might. "What the heck was that for?" "Thank you for your help, my boy, but I must go save the day." "Yeesh. No need to be dramatic. A simple 'put me down, please' would have done it." But All Might was either unaware or uncaring of the looks Izuku was sending him. Plastering on a boisterous smile, he puffed up his chest, and nothing happened. Just a few wisps of steam that quickly died out. Izuku stared at him. "I must. Puff. Nothing. Save. Nothing. The day. Nothing." During his attempts, Izuku had enough time to get up from the ground and brush himself off. His look from his hero, who was looking pained with his gaunt eyes and furrowed brows, then at the sludge villain that was attacking his classmate. He wished he could help, but he didn't have anything else in his backpack like his lunchbox. But he approached the more and more troubled-looking hero. The man was muttering something about his time being out, but mostly saying that he was pathetic a lot, which was concerning considering the man's bordering lethal condition, but Izuku put that thought aside at the moment. "All Might," Izuku said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "Where's that bottle you said you had?" Blue Eyes looked towards him. Right here? What? He glumly said, fishing out a plastic soda bottle from his pocket. Izuku went to grab it. I'm gonna shove the villain's eyes in there again. All Might's eyes widened as he raised the bottle out of reach at the last moment. That's vigilantism, may I remind you. There's a crowd here. You'll get caught, and even I won't be able to keep you out of trouble for illegal quirk use. All Might. Izuku waved his arms around frantically. My classmate's in trouble, and if you don't give me the bottle right now, I'm gonna do something stupid. A frown formed on his lips. Like your legs will move on their own, stupid? He nodded, completely serious. Yes. All Might's gaze wavered between Izuku and Hino slowly being consumed by slime. They wouldn't have much more time left at this rate. In his scrawny fingers, All Might tightened his grip on the bottle. What's your quirk range, kid? 50 meters. All Might nodded and set his expression into one of utmost graveness as he looked into Izuku's eyes. You pull the eyes forward, and I'll handle it from there. Even in this form, I'm technically registered as a hero with the commission, so I won't get in trouble. Stay back. Pull them forwards, no more. Got it. Izuku nodded furiously, mouth set in a far too serious line considering how his green hair bobbed ridiculously. All Might had time to give him one last nod of his own before running into the fray. The heroes tried to stop him, but the man was surprisingly spry despite his emaciated frame. And being well over 7 feet, every stride he made with his long legs was quick. He was on top of the villain in a matter of seconds. Izuku practically buzzed with energy even as he forced himself to behave calmly so he could better concentrate. He was about to watch All Might in action when the man was little more than quirkless. Not only that, he was about to help him too. But despite his excitement, he had a job to do, and so he forced himself to focus on what was really important. Reaching out with his sixth sense, he felt the smooth, circular weight of the villain's eyeballs. With a pull of his quirk, both of them were forced down, the towering sludge forced down in a weird, liquid squat to follow them. Pissed-off eyes swiveled onto him. Arg. Not this brat a guy. Then his angry burbles were cut off as All Might decked him in the face with an opened soda bottle. Coca-Cola Smas, he shouted, with all the intense awesomeness of his normal form. The eyes were forced in with a good amount of sludge following it. All Might shoved the cap onto the plastic bottle in the next moment within dramatic motion, as if he were sealing the pits of Tartarus and not a Coke bottle. Just like that, any slime that hadn't gotten in on time dissipated, shrinking into nothingness the longer and longer it wasn't in contact with the main body. As soon as enough slime disappeared, Hino fell forwards. All Might caught her just in time, but one look at the man had the former hostage grimacing. I got saved by a homeless man? She shrieked. Oh, this is so lame. Well, Izuku thought. No one ever said the fiery redhead had a good personality. Then she ripped herself from All Might's arms, who was looking rather put out, and stumbled forwards. Well, that was mean. Izuku frowned and gave a little push to his quirk. She tripped in the next second and face-planted onto the rubble. Fuck you, Deku, the girl shouted on pure instinct. But when she went to look down, her shoelaces were once again untied. Izuku whistled innocently as he slipped further into the crowds. No need to stick around for her to actually realize he'd done it. Besides, he had a limited edition All Might lunchbox to find and a signature to wrangle from the pro hero himself. 0. I am here, All Might shouted as he skidded into view from out of fucking nowhere. With your lunchbox. And sent him into a mini heart attack for the second time that day. Oh, what the heck? Izuku screamed in shock, jumping back. In reflex, he sent a pebble into the hero's path, another schoolyard trick of his, and sent the critically injured symbol of peace tripping. Izuku had all of half a second to think before he dove forwards to the ground and made himself into a very nice cushion for the man. Less nice on his end, but his mama didn't raise an inconsiderate boy. Oof, he groaned as he hit the concrete, and all 200+ pounds of the hero fell on him. He was still pretty heavy even in this form. A little direction from his quirk stopped the blood spraying from All Might's mouth from falling onto his uniform. So at least there was that. My boy, you didn't have to do that. All Might shouted as he shakily stumbled upwards. Izuku groaned as he flipped over and took the hand outstretched to him. Sorry, All Might, but the gaping hole in your side, and you currently spewing out blood doesn't help you. All Might wiped the blood away from his chin sheepishly. Still, I'm more durable than I look. But actually, that's what I was here to talk to you about. I thought you were here to give back my limited edition lunchbox. I was actually looking around forever for it. He'd even conceded defeat and had started heading back towards his side of Mizutofu, where he was supposed to meet Kaken, before All Might had sprung out of nowhere onto this empty street. His ears turned a little red. Well, I mean, yes, returning your property is important to me. So here. The hero held out Izuku's lunchbox, and Izuku took it gratefully. It even had his signature on it, just like he'd said it would. But, and here, the hero stood a little taller, even if he wasn't quite as impressive in this form. I have actually come here in regards to my injury. Izuku tried to give the man his most reassuring smile. It's okay, sir. I promise I won't tell anyone. Let me rephrase. I realize now that my speech to you earlier wasn't quite inspiring. It was actually pretty embarrassingly bad. Nana would be disappointed. That last bit he muttered to himself. Izuku just cocked his head before going to pat the man on his arm, too short to be able to pat him on the shoulder. Despite the comforting motion and his soft tone of voice, the next words out of his mouth were, "Yeah, it did suck." All Might barked out a laugh. You know, your green hair and bluntness remind me of someone. But I'm not here to reminisce. No, I recognize that you have true heroic spirit that can one day make you into a hero who can do it all. Telekinesis really is capable of so many things. I said you wouldn't be very awe-inspiring earlier, but you were willing to face down a villain with just a minor telekinesis quirk to save someone when seasoned pros wouldn't. You got this old bag of bones to act when faced with a two-story sludge villain. Those are the real traits that make an inspiring hero, not their quirk. So yes, you, Midoriya, can become the kind of hero that puts smiles on people and bring them hope. And here, he paused a little, seemingly nervous. Izuku let him have his time, wrapped up in thoughts of his own. This was certainly an improvement from what he'd heard before. When he told most people of his desire to be a hero, he was met with chuckles and half-hearted encouragements. For someone to take the time to find him again and admit they were wrong, that he could be so much more than some no-name, third-rate hero, for it to be from the #1 hero of all people, that was pretty spectacular. He was also on the verge of tears and wasn't certain that he could open his mouth without his voice cracking. What I wanted to say, All Might began again, was that I want to help you become a hero. I want to train you, young Midoriya. Oh damn it, the world was getting blurry. He was really about to cry in front of the #1, wasn't he? Also, I'm literally dying, so would you like my quirk? What? He squawked. Oh, there it was. The voice crack. Chapter 4. It's your power. Wait, shouldn't this speech be for someone else? Sorry I'm late, Kaken, Izuku said as he marched into the cafe. A villain tried to kill me earlier, and All Might saved me. Then we went flying into the air and ended up on a rooftop. But then the villain escaped from my lunchbox, and we had to go beat it up again together. Jesus fuck, Deku, just say you don't want to come next time. It'd be more believable than that. He shrugged. If you say so. Wasn't his responsibility to correct Kaken's opinions, just his violent behaviors. Speaking of, so wanna Ramon? My treat. He deserved it for not trying to burn off Izuku's face for being late. Katsuki grumbled, always a little miffed at first to be given things, before nodding anyways and grabbing one of the Ramon from the fridge. Izuku grabbed his own before they both went to the counter to buy their soft drinks and order some snacks. Izuku got some onigiri while Katsuki ordered some spicy tuna sushi. From there, they sat down in a nice little corner of the cafe. Katsuki always looked like a chipmunk as he practically inhaled his food, only really starting to talk after he'd finished. But today, Izuku couldn't focus on his childhood friend's aggressive ramblings. No, his mind was far too focused on the offer All Might had given him. It sounded impossible. It was absolutely ridiculous. Who just hands over the greatest quirk in the world to some kid just because they were going to fling themselves into a misdemeanor vigilantism court case with nothing but a soda bottle in hand? All Might, apparently. Of course he'd said yes. Of course he did. He'd be a fool not to. Earth to fucking Deku. You float your brain up to space with the rest of your common sense. Katsuki bit out, hand reared to smack him on the back of the head. At that very moment, the sushi roll he was holding up with the chopsticks in his other hand wobbled dangerously and started falling to the ground in literal slow motion. Hopefully no one would mind the minor public quirk use. Slap abandoned, Katsuki growled and went to snatch it back up, but the sushi veered out of the way. Damn it, stop being a dick, Deku. Izuku rolled his eyes and did his best to hide his smirk behind his onigiri. I have no idea what you're talking about. You should really be more careful with your food, Katsuki. Shut up, you asshole. Give me back my sushi, or I'm gonna shove an explosion so far up your ass. Children here, Katsuki. Izuku cut off, gesturing to the many families dotting the quaint cafe. Just as Kakin was about to retaliate with a threat that was no doubt worse, another sushi went soaring off his plate. Oh no, he gasped mockingly. You should catch it before it hits the ground. You fucking ass jerk. He huffed out as he dove towards it, hands cupped, but missing all the same. Gee, Kakin, you've sure got butterfingers. He teased as he once more swerved away the food from his friend's reach. I'm gonna kick your, but you little annoying gremlin. You got that? Bakugo all but shouted at him. Oh wow, would you look at that? Izuku said with false wonder in his voice. The rest of your sushi is falling. Gosh, that's so unfortunate. Just like that, half a dozen pieces of sushi were floating around Kakin's head, twirling around as if they were in zero gravity. But no matter how many times the boy tried to grab them, they always darted out of the way just in time. Izuku didn't let the myriad of floating sushi return to Kakin's plate until the boy had run out of expletives and threats of bodily harm. Izuku sighed, satisfied as his friend tired himself out. If he couldn't trip Kakin, food was just as good of a way to tame him. It might seem a little mean, but this was the only cafe this side of Mizudafu that hadn't blacklisted Kakin for blowing something up. So, really, it was for his own good. 0. Evenings in the Midoriya household were always a fun affair. With 2 telekinesis users around, the house was full of tiny objects being floated every which way. Passing the remote became a little game of catch with their quirks. Cooking was just as fun, with lightweight, plastic plates doing a little dance, courtesy of Izuku, and eggs doing a little conga line through the air as his mom attracted them to her one after the other. And then there was the phone that they often had trailing around one of them. It was nearly at the weight limit for both of them, but had been bought specifically by their dad, so it would be just under the ounce line. On it was a FaceTime with Midoriya Hisashi, Izuku's dad. At least 3 times a week, he'd make an effort to call from his apartment in America, despite the time zone difference. When the man was able to visit, at least once every 6 months, cooking nights became even more ridiculous, with food sometimes being broiled and charred mid-air, courtesy of his father's fire-breathing quirk. So, Izuku, how was your day? His father had asked as Izuku cleaned the rice they'd be using that night. Izuku looked over to the phone, eyeing the man with a considering look. His father was rather plain, all things considered. He had black hair and black eyes, was a salary man, and was a good person, albeit a little too grounded, with a slight bias towards Izuku going into accounting instead of heroics. Although Izuku didn't think his father had realized he knew that, he did do his best to support him by sending hero magazines and movies over from America, even if he didn't understand why Izuku didn't want to follow in his footsteps. Still, Izuku didn't want to risk setting off his father on a worried tangent about the dangers of hero work if he mentioned the sludge villain attack on him, even if he'd been completely fine and even got an All Might signature out of it. And the hero's offer of personal training and his quirk, but that wouldn't ever be said out loud ever. So he settled on telling him what he'd already told his mom. It was a pretty average day. I went out to get some food with Kakin. I think I'm going to start exercising more regularly, go out on jogs and whatnot. His father hummed in acknowledgement. Ah, that's nice. Did I ever tell you I was on my high school's track team? Inko took that moment to come back into the kitchen from the pantry. Yes, Hisashi, you've told us all many times, she said with an exasperated sigh but a smile on her face all the same. Izuku couldn't help the way his own lips quirked up. until a levitating tomato from the other side of the room suddenly bonked him on his head. "Oops, sorry," his mom said, sounding only a little apologetic. Izuku huffed out a little laugh good-naturedly, while his father bellowed far more uproariously on his end. It was just part of the fire user's personality. Yes, evenings for the Midoriya family were warm and pleasant. 0. As Izuku would quickly find out, mornings would not be so nice. "What?" He drew in a ragged breath. "Are you trying to do? Kill me?" Izuku cried out as he dragged a discarded car door on each hand across the beach, trudging bit by bit. "Nonsense. This is good body and character building." All Might, his new mentor, said cheerily. "I miss when we were still pulling shards of plastic and trash out of the sand." He said, only half joking. That had been the easy part. His quirk had a sort of sense that let him pick up on the arrangement of objects around him, no matter how minute, in a radius around him up to 50 meters away. It'd make him a great rescue hero one day, since he'd be able to find anyone in the area and maybe even use his telekinesis to funnel in air and disperse dangerous, airborne particles if his control got fine enough. Although, in this case, it had made him great at slowly but surely picking up lots of micro-trash at a time. "Your quirk is very suited for that work," All Might admitted. "However, this is where the real magic begins." Izuku nodded. "Yeah, it'll help me bulk up. And it's the spirit of heroism, right? Doing something like this." All Might looked at him proudly. "That's right." Well, he liked making people smile by pulling a few goofy pranks here and there. And by proving even useless quirks could be of help. Community service would just be another way to make people's lives better and bring a smile on their face. 0. For the months leading up to the final exams at Aldera, Midoriya Izuku put in a stupid amount of elbow grease into cleaning up the beach. During both his mornings before school and his afternoons after school let out. He got a day off the physical work on Sunday, so his muscles could rest, but that time was spent either studying for the UA written exam or practicing fine-tuning his quirk even further. Those months, Izuku had stewed on something, but it wasn't until a few weeks before the UA entrance exam that he finally worked up the courage to speak his mind to All Might, or Yagi, as he'd been told to call him when he was acting as his civilian identity. "Hey, All Might," he murmured, surprisingly not too out of breath as he dragged a washing machine behind him with the number 1 hero on top of it. In his full form, too. "What is it, my boy?" Yagi asked, exuberant as ever. "Remember to put your leg muscles to work. Bad form will hurt you in the long run, almost as bad or worse than a villain will." "All right," Izuku said as he readjusted his posture, putting less stress on his back. "But All Might, I was wondering." "Yes. I know you said you want me to inherit your quirk, but..." He trailed off, swallowing nervously. He really hoped the hero wouldn't take this the wrong way. But would it be alright if I took the entrance exam without getting it first?" He finally said, stumbling on his words as he forced himself to push them out. It's fine, if you say no. I get that it might be a little unheroic to not go all out when everyone is giving it their all. But you want to prove that you can get in on your own power," All Might said, his voice even and understanding. Izuku nodded, even as he tried not to look at his mentor, too worried that he'd see the man dismissing his dreams of getting in the top hero school with just a weak telekinesis quirk. Earlier pep talk or not, it was a far-fetched dream. "Why, yeah. Since I was little, this kid I knew called me Deku, meaning useless. It stuck. It was supposed to be an insult, but I embraced it, you know? I wanted to be the hero who could make anything useless into a tool to help." He was a little embarrassed to spill this all and hoped Yagi couldn't see the red that was no doubt forming on the tips of his ears. But Izuku had always been a candid person. If he was going to spell out his plan, to the number 1 hero no less, he wouldn't skirt around the issue. "So, yeah, I want to be able to see if I would have made it as a hero with my own power. As useless as it is, I want to show the world how helpful it can be." Behind him, he felt All Might shifting his weight on the washing machine. He groaned a little internally as that disrupted his strides and forced him to readjust. But he was no slouch either. With a set determination to his face, he pushed on and waited for All Might's verdict. A few moments passed, with only the sound of the ocean waves, the shifting of sand, and Izuku's own heavy breathing breaking it up. Then, finally, Midoriya, I know you are a smart boy. Your power is far from useless. Perhaps in another person's hands, it would be weak. But you've put a lot of work into fine-tuning it and finding all sorts of uses that I never would have thought of. I have no doubt that you'd be able to pass the UA entrance exam with just your quirk. Izuku perked up at that. Really? Yes. However, you are right that it is unheroic to go into any scenario without the full tools at a hero's disposal. He wilted a little. Oh, I understand the sentiment of wanting to see if you could get in on your own. I myself had a lot of trouble seeing my new power as well mine. Yagi huffed. Tell you what, I'll let you in on a little secret. Believe it or not, before receiving One for All, I was quirkless. Izuku whirled around, staring at the hero with wide eyes in shock. You, the #1 hero, were quirkless? All Might watched him with an unreadable gaze. Yes, I was. Izuku was left amazed. Then, he nodded once to himself in satisfaction before turning around and continuing pulling. Well, that explains how you were so awesome during the second fight with the walking Mizutofu sewer violation. A cough behind him. Izuku easily deflected the spittles of blood and, with his quirk, fluttered another tissue towards All Might from where they'd left the box to the side. He even did his best to find the source of the bleeding and slow it, just enough to allow clotting to begin again. To his satisfaction, the bloody coughing fit was already winding down. Thank you, my boy, the man said. And I must ask, what do you mean by that? Izuku tilted his head to the side, eyes drifting up in thought. I mean, it makes sense you'd still be so badass even without your quirk. You landed me flat on my back. You jumped right past the heroes, and they couldn't even catch you. Not even Kimui Woods. You even jumped over the fire my classmate was making and through the rubble. Then you stared down a 2-story villain like it was nothing. He listed off with ease. You were so cool because you've been quirkless so it never became a crutch. You can stand as a hero all on your own. Izuku concluded. All Might went silent for a while after that. You know, I think that's the first time in over 30 years anyone has told me I could be a hero without One for All. He said thoughtfully. Izuku didn't know how that was possible. The man was 7 feet tall and over 200 pounds, even emaciated. He had 30 years of combat and rescue experience on top of that. How could anyone just say his hero career hinged on his quirk? He wanted to speak up, but All Might wasn't done, so, Midoriya, it's only fitting I tell you what I often needed to hear in my youth and what I think you also need to hear. Your telekinesis is your power, true. But One for All is also your power, just as much as it is mine. Or, at the very least, it will be. You learn it and make it yours. Does that make sense? Logically? Yes. But in practice? Not really. It was hard to see All Might's overwhelming power as ever being his. Still, he tried his best to make it sound like he knew what he was doing. Sure. I won't say you can't take the exam without using One for All, but don't think that it isn't your power, and a hero must always bring their all to any occasion. So, how about a compromise? You inherit my power before the exam is planned. However, you are free to use it as much or as little as you'd like. That way, you'll have it in case you need it. Is that good? Izuku bit his lip as he trudged ahead. He could logically see the sense in that. It was the perfect compromise. But, Deku, useless, versatile, capable. A riddle of contradictions that made up his life and the quirk he'd worked his whole life to develop. 15 ounces. A limit. A massive, mountainous villain. A problem he dealt with just his telekinesis. Hadn't he already had his moment to prove himself? Was he really so attached to his limits, or rather, the feeling of defying them, that he was worried about getting rid of those limits completely? Well, when put like that, it sounded like the words of a rebellious teenager. He snorted at his own stubbornness. Well, one had to be a special kind of person to look at 15 ounces and take it as a personal challenge issued by the world itself. Yeah, he finally said, that sounds good. 0. By the way, I think it's concerning how you've made being useless your whole personality. You don't get to talk Mr. Symbol of Peace with 3 organs half missing. Chapter 5. If you can't beat him, trip him with a really, really big rock. Today was the first day in the annual testing preparations. And, unfortunately, they weren't doing fun things like checking on the mock cities and running tests on the zero-pointers. No, it was the worst day out of all of them. Application review day. So, the UA staff were stuck in the teacher's lounge all shift as they rifled through stacks and stacks of papers that could have hit the ceiling if they weren't broken up into segments. For the nth time, Kiyama sighed in exhaustion. Snipe downed another coffee before shoving back on his mask, and once more bemoaning that he hadn't brought his guns so he could end his misery already. Ken patted him on the back before offering to just throw him out the window if it would help. The only thing that broke up the monotony and self-deprecating jokes was when someone made commentary about the candidates. "Hey Sho, look, we've got a jokester in my testing area," Present Mike said as he sifted through yet another application. Aizawa Shoto sighed, looking not at all amused at the slip in front of him. "Quirk, Floaty McFloat face." He scoffed, looking away. Low-hanging fruit. Well, he was 4 when he named it. In any case, you probably don't have to worry about dealing with him. Says here he can only move around 15 ounces. Yamada shrugged. Might get into Gen Ed though. He has the grades for it. And ooh look, it says the little listener is fluent in English. Aizawa sunk further into his capture scarf. He loved Hisashi's voice, but he'd throttle him if he got excited over teaching irregular verbs one more time. Truly, the most miserable people on earth were the UA teachers during applicant review day. So miserable, they didn't notice the glint in their principal's eyes. 0. Midoriya Izuku was a bundle of nerves as he entered UA, and it wasn't just from the new power he could feel thrumming inside of him. Unfortunately, historically, when Izuku got nervous, that meant he was in a bad position with bullies who hadn't figured out to avoid him yet. So, out of reflex, he'd accidentally sent several pebbles at people's shoes or messed up the laces of the next intimidating person to get too close. It felt like he'd just about tripped up everyone here for the exams, but himself. Some poor girl had been running around helping people up with her quirk and, in her haste, had left someone floating for far too long and had to get another applicant with a frog quirk to rope that person down with their tongue. Kaken had knocked him upside the head for that, which, fair, Izuku deserved that. But he still tripped up Kaken afterwards because one couldn't just make exceptions when it came to conditioning. He'd read it in a doggy blog. In fact, Izuku was closing said doggy blog from his tabs, with a mental note to make his next treat really nice to make up for the trip, and putting away his phone as they reached the processing tables. He had a little moment to nerd out over the fact that he'd just gotten his application checked off by a real-life ectoplasm clone before taking his seat. Right? Well, this was going to be great. 0. It was not great. He got yelled at 2 separate times before the test had even started. The only highlight of this whole experience was when Present Mike himself had yelled out for them to go. Go, go, go. There's no countdown in real life. He'd yelled from above. Izuku had hesitated, but, having read many doggy training blogs, he knew conditioning techniques well enough to see a full immersion tactic when it was right in front of him, sort of like shoving someone into the deep end of a pool. So, while he initially hesitated, he was also the first one to start sprinting to the entrance. I am so going to mention this on doggymoms.com, he muttered to himself as he ran, gaining an odd look from the blue-haired boy, the one that yelled at him, who was one of the people fast enough to catch up to him once the others got started. But Izuku paid him no mind. No, he was directing his quirk to his first one-pointer instead. With a little push from his quirk, a dozen nuts and bolts conveniently unscrewed themselves and fell to the ground with tiny plinks against the concrete. Another dozen followed. The one-pointer sort of just fell apart after that. The next one he took on was a two-pointer, and, feeling the sense of thin wiring inside, he tugged on that until the thing lost power to its upper body. Izuku moved on cheerily. For the next one, he popped out its red sensor light. Because, if he was right, there was no way UA would allow a robot to stomp around aimlessly in an arena filled with miners. And Izuku noted with satisfaction that he was right as the robot came to a halt, entering a forced shutdown mode. Right, that's the quickest way. Izuku muttered to himself decidedly as he started unscrewing the sensor lights left and right. 1.3, 5, 6, 7. 10, 12, 15. On and on he went. It was laughably easy for his quirk. He could concentrate on around a dozen items now, and each cheap sensor weighed barely over an ounce. One-pointers had just one sensor. Two-pointers had three. Three-pointers had six. Doing the math, it was more lucrative for him to go after roughly a dozen one-pointers, gathering around a dozen points, than four two-pointers or two three-pointers. Which was fantastic since he didn't want to get in the way of all the hard hitters who were aiming exclusively for the higher point bots. After that, his points started to rise far more rapidly. 15 to 23 to 30 to 40 to 46 to 51. That's how his tactics stayed until someone got themselves cornered in an alley by three two-pointers. He didn't want to steal people's points, but he'd also feel pretty terrible if he let someone get into a bad situation. Thankfully, there were props littered all around the fake city. Casting his eyes about, his gaze landed on a nearby telephone pole covered in flyers, which gave him an idea. Because paper? Paper was his friend. Excellent for party tricks, pranks, and blinding the robots for a temporary time without shutting them down completely. After all, what was Deku but an aspiring hero who could make anything useful? Stripping the telephone pole of its paper flyers, he sent them whirling into the thing's sensors. Attack them or scatter, he shouted to the boy. The applicant nodded gratefully and decided to take down one of the robots to clear a path before fleeing. Izuku watched him leave, making certain he wasn't coming back, before letting go of his control on the papers. The remaining two robots powered back on for all of a second before he popped out their lights too. Izuku looked from the papers fluttering to the ground and then back to the robots he'd decommissioned. You know what? That works. You're coming with me now. Decided, Izuku turned his small stack of papers into cranes so they'd be smaller before setting back out into the exam. 0. Halfway across campus, a stoat was cackling loudly at the dumbfounded look on Present Mike and the fatherly pride on All Might's face, as if he were watching his kid do really well at his first Little League game. I suppose I'm not getting him in my homeroom, am I? Present Mike said, a little put out, and he'd really wanted to test the kid's knowledge in English, too. All Might fist pumped the air as he watched the screens, seeing the boy swoop in with his mini army of cranes to save another contestant. Hell yeah? Midoriya. Eraserhead shot his new co-worker a look. Could your favoritism get any more blatant? All Might didn't even take his eyes off the screen. He just plucked something out from his pocket. A mini green flag with the word Deku on it. He waved around the tiny thing in his hand, making it look, frankly, ridiculous next to his 7-foot frame. Yes, it can. 0. Then the 0-pointer came and Izuku was just about ready to turn tail. Yeah, time to get out of Dodge, he said. Someone gave him a weird look as they passed. What's Dodge? Izuku shrugged. Some American thing my dad told me about. In any case, his quirk was absolutely not fit for this at all. The 0-pointer was truly massive, rivaling the sludge villain, rivaling multi-story buildings even, and far taller than the 50 meters he could use his quirk in, meaning he couldn't reach the sensors, and it was worth absolutely no points. So he turned on his heel and started running. And then, help! Izuku froze. Please help. I'm stuck. Izuku turned around, rigidly, and swallowed back his common sense as his eyes landed on the source of the noise. Oh, it was the brown-haired girl who was helping everyone at the entrance to the school when he'd tripped a bunch of people. No one was going over to help her now. Well, okay, from the way his legs were already moving, one person was going to help her. Time for the 7th stupidest thing I've ever done. Izuku shouted to psyche himself up as he ran over. This is so much nope. 1,000 times nope, he muttered to himself as he started running over. At the same time, Izuku tried dividing his attention between rescuing the girl or somehow finding a way to dismantle the 0-pointer before it got any closer. Too tall to reach the sensors, the wires were too reinforced to tug and snap, and those weren't bolts but rivets and welded together steel. What's wrong? He rushed to say as he got to the girl and started trying to lift the concrete. I thought, he groaned from the effort, that you could lift this stuff. Her voice was desperate. I get nauseous and really weak. I can't even move. She cried. Oh, he perked up at that. I can help with that. 5-point contact, right? He asked. Huh. Why yes, she said, voice tired but confused. With a little push from his quirk, he focused on her hand and lifted it up. It rose on its own, to her surprised yelp, and all 5 fingers pressed against the rubble above her. It was weightless in an instant, and Izuku had just enough time before the zero-pointer stomped on them to direct the suddenly 0-ounce chunk of rubble with his quirk. He swerved it right behind one of the zero-pointer's legs before forcing it to hurtle back towards them. And, in the greatest trip of the century, the robot's leg got pushed off balance, and the hulking metal giant slowly crashed down and onto its back with a thunderous cacophony that shook the ground. Then he grabbed the girl, tossed her over his shoulder like he did to All Might, and ran away like a bat out of hell. Huh, suck it, Zashi. Can't talk about adverbs in homeroom now, can you? Shut up, Namuri. Let me mourn in peace. In contrast, All Might stood up and cheered. That's my boy. Awesome with, or without, one F. Nedzu shot up from his own seat, a panicked look in his eyes as he watched the hero about to blab about the nation's greatest secret like it was a pep rally, and promptly flung his clipboard into the symbol of peace's face. Think fast. It decked the hero in the face, and All Might's hand shot up to clutch a suddenly bleeding nose. He moaned from pain, his voice suddenly muffled and nasally. Ow wow. Chapter 6. Oh, just oh. Chapter text. Midoriya Izuku got into UA with 54 villain points and 38 rescue points, which made him first place. What? He'd almost asked All Might if this was the right letter as soon as he'd gotten his results and run down to meet him at the newly cleaned beach. Well, after he'd had a celebratory dinner with his mom and called his dad. I told you, my boy, All Might said, somewhat nasally as he proudly patted him on the shoulder, the force of his hand almost buckling his knees. Telekinesis is ridiculously overpowered, even with a 15-ounce limit. And you didn't even have to use one for all. Is that a bandage for a broken nose? Izuku couldn't help but point out. No. Wasn't that a little defensive? Was it from a villain? He pressed. Yeah, sure, let's go with that. Now, we were talking about your really awesome quirk. All Might said, you outdid yourself there. Wow, okay, that was playing dirty. All Might knew Izuku handled praise about as well as Katsuki handled therapy. Well then, all I had to do was blind them or go after their wiring. Pretty simple. He stuttered out, embarrassed. And, was that a tiny flag poking out the hero's pocket? Ah, clever. Like how you've studied anatomy to take advantage of the body's most lightweight and fragile parts. I'll be honest, I'd never given the finer points of the human body much attention outside of training and basic first aid, but oh boy have you made me deeply fear for the safety of my medulla oblongata, he said with hearty laughter despite the slightly messed up subject. Izuku shook his hands frantically. Kinda like that. It's medulla oblongata, by the way. But it's not like I'd actually use my quirk to attack the brain. But, when should I first use one for all? I feel the quirk's huge pull energy in me, but now that the beach is cleaned up, it's not like we can use it as a training ground. And I don't know if I should use it for the first time ever against a person. All Might nodded. I hadn't thought of that, but I can see why that would be a problem. Okay, well, I am a teacher at UA. By the way, I can't believe I had to learn that from a projection. Izuku pointed out. Shush, I bet your reaction was hilarious. Oh yeah, my parents didn't stop laughing for a while. All Might huffed out a laugh of his own. I'm sure. In any case, we can just use the school facilities. I'll get in contact with Nedzu for permission. He knows about the quirk situation, so I'm pretty sure he'll understand. 0. Izuku spent the next few days getting shocked looks from his teachers and classmates for his admittance letter, and carrying around a spray bottle and Snickers candy bars in equal measure to quell Katsuki's temperament. Being the top scorer at UA had pissed off his childhood friend to the point where he probably wouldn't notice if Izuku started pulling out rolled-up newspapers to bop him on the nose with. At this point, half the fun was seeing how far he could push it before Kaken realized what he was doing. But as the blonde was absolutely flipping out on him, Izuku didn't think he'd so much as noticed. It took a few days before Izuku had gotten his friend back to heal, but by then, Yagi had gotten permission from Nedzu to use their training grounds. So, it was a grumbly Kaken he parted ways with that day and not a king explosion murder Kaken. In any case, the day was very cheerful and bright for one Midoriya Izuku as he found his way to the train station and then to UA. All Might had met him at the gate and passed him his guest ID, which he would use for training until the term actually started. A short trip to the training fields later, and the two were left standing around looking a little unsure. I'll be honest, I never got this far with my training regime, Yagi admitted. Izuku came to a stuttering halt. Wait, what? This is the most powerful quirk in Japan, if not the world, and you didn't make a plan for it. All Might had the decency to look away, embarrassed. Clench your glutes? I guess. It really just came naturally to me. Now, as I was quirkless, one for all enhanced my body. But for you, it should enhance your quirk. Give it a try. After a moment, Izuku took in a deep breath, let it out, and shrugged. How hard could it be? After All Might had figured it out, and even Izuku's hero worship couldn't stop him from admitting the man lacked any common sense outside of hero work and training. Anyone that dressed in pinstripe suits and decided half a stomach and a missing lung were okay to work with were a few beans short of a burrito. All Might gave an encouraging smile. That's the spirit. It can't be too bad. You've beefed up enough. What's the worst that could happen? Izuku nodded, looked at Yagi, looked down at himself, reached into that well of power, then turned on OFA. Instantly, the entire field started to float. Dirt lifted from the ground and props and equipment started to rise in the air. Everything on the field got pulled upwards, Izuku and All Might included. This was already pretty amazing, but Yagi's squawk of some kind of emotion made Izuku look up in concern. All Might? He asked. The man just stuttered, looking somewhat hilarious as he flailed around in his buff form and sent himself in a lazy spin, wide-eyed like he'd seen a ghost. I know, this is the most I've been able to lift, Izuku said, cheerily, trying to reassure the man's nerves. Must be a little odd being picked up by an invisible force. It was even slightly weird for Izuku, and it was his quirk. That's like what? 20 dumbbells? But if you want, I can set it all down. And not that, my boy. All Might cried out. It's... He paused. Wait a minute, I just need a sec to come back around, the man said with his back facing Izuku. A few seconds later, and with a little nudge from Izuku's quirk, and the hero rotated around until he was facing back in the right direction. Righto, he shot out an arm to point at something behind Izuku. It's that. Huh? What? Izuku asked as he used his suddenly stronger telekinesis to twist his whole body around. In the distance was UA High School, specifically UA, with the entire building ripped from its foundations and floating off the ground a clear 30 meters in the air. And it wasn't just the main building, either. He could see the nearby gyms floating as well, leisurely tossing and turning in the air. Oh God, were those the USJ zones going into the sky? Izuku's jaw dropped. Green eyes went wide. Aye. Neither could say anything as they watched the slow, floating chaos around them. It wasn't until 5 minutes later, when they heard a little roaring sound in the distance, that they snapped out of it. Izuku blinked as he watched a large stoat in a suit fly a jet pack in their direction before coming to a stop right in front of the green-haired boy. Mr. Midoriya, could you please put down the school? Principal Nedzu politely asked. Chapter 7. An old man, a clairvoyant, and an inventor walk into a high school. Chapter text. Izuku and All Might had quickly come to the conclusion that they were way in over their heads. So, as soon as Izuku had found out how to more or less gently set down UA, emphasis on more or less, to Cementos' undying horror at the foundation work he'd have to redo, they called in the big guns. AKA, literally any and everyone who might have a clue on how to control OFA. A week later, and Izuku felt very much like a specimen under a microscope as the David Shield ran another diagnostic test in the UA labs. Is that the last one? He asked nervously. On the other side of the blast-resistant glass covered in a lead grate, between the lead-encased rooms, just about the only material he couldn't levitate something through, he saw the renowned inventor shake his head. Sorry, Midoriya, but we've still got a few more to run. Bah, an older man said. You're never gonna figure this out with your graphs and data. The kid needs to get out there and do his stuff. Get a few beat downs, figure it out like that. I've found hero students learn fast when it's either that or eating dirt. All Might full body flinched. Gran Torino, the semi-retired pro hero that had trained All Might. That man was, to put it lightly, a force of nature. Izuku had tried tripping him up once or twice, even bringing out the candy, but the man was too smart for the conditioning Izuku usually pulled. It had worked on curbing Kaken's violent behavior, and Izuku had even started carrying around juice boxes to train All Might out of his destructive habits. But Torino had caught on too fast. At the very least, the elderly man wasn't mad. In fact, after Izuku explained himself, he got a good laugh out of it and started carrying juice boxes around himself to help in Izuku's efforts to rein in that buffoon Yagi, as Torino called him. I didn't fly here from my island just to not study One for All, Shield protested. This is the first time I've had the chance to see how it affects a quirked holder. Izuku wrung his hands. Teach, thank you for coming again, Dr. Shield. He stuttered out. He still couldn't quite believe the man had come all this way to help him. Shield gave him a gentle smile. Like I said, it was no problem. You don't need to thank me every other minute, kid. All Might elbowed his old friend with a boisterous laugh. Ha ha. Didn't I tell you the boy was polite? You said it many times. You dote on him quite a lot. Came a short response. And there was the final person in the group, Sir Naitai, which would have been just as cool as when he met Dr. Shield, except for the fact that all Izuku's interactions with the man involved clipped responses interspersed with rare moments of blunt humor and the occasional agreement about how cool All Might was. Yagi didn't seem fazed by his old sidekick's less than stellar opinion. That, or he hadn't picked up on it yet. Instead, he dug around in his pocket. Right? That reminds me. Then, with a blinding grin, he poofed into his huge form and held out little flags with the name Deku on them. Who wants a commemorative Deku flag? Night Eye face-bombed. David took a flag and then went back for another. For my daughter, he said. Torino snatched the flags out of All Might's hands and dunked them into the trash. The kicked puppy look on Yagi's face brought no remorse. Enough fooling around, Toshi, Gran grumbled. Izuku, for his part, quietly meeped and did his best to sink into a puddle on the ground. Look at what you've done, Gran said, gesturing to Izuku. You've damn near given him a heart attack. Were those flags? Izuku finally asked, voice small. His questions went ignored. David paid no mind to the squabbles going around. Instead, he typed something up on his computer and turned back to Izuku. All right, get ready to start the speed tests. The speed tests? Izuku asked, suddenly nervous as panels in the testing room opened up and turrets emerged. They powered on with a very intimidating whirring noise. Rubber bullets will start firing at you. What? In 3, 2. Hold up. 1. Izuku let out a very pathetic scream as he started rapidly trying to redirect bullets mid-air. In the midst of his panic, he had just enough time to think about how lucky Shield was that he was on the other side of that lead grate covered window, because otherwise, he'd be dangling from the ceiling already, whether Izuku actually wanted that or not. 0. Izuku gasped as he collapsed out of the testing room, feeling like he'd just run a marathon and was no closer to getting control over OFA to show for it. He'd had to deactivate the enhancer quirk before stepping out of the room to make sure he wouldn't rip UA off its foundations again. Then he made it all of 1 foot out the door before he face-planted from exhaustion. He made no move to get up, electing to instead groan into the floor. When Shield went to help him up, he panicked because, that was the guy who'd just shot him with 50 bullets. So, out of sheer adrenaline, he raised his head and shouted, "Locked knees of justice." Wah! Then David's shield fell to the ground, unconscious. Gran Torino, Night Eye, and All Might all shot to their feet and crowded around the inventor. My boy, what did you do? Is this one of your wibbly-wobbly internal bleeding tricks? All Might asked from where he was half crouched to the ground with his hands braced against his knees. He pointed a finger to his wound and then mimed coughing for emphasis. Night Eye looked somewhat lost. His wibbly-wobbly what? All Might didn't see fit to explain and neither did Izuku. He just put his forehead back against the floor and mumbled into the concrete. Don't worry, he's fine. I just used Floaty McFloat face without one for all to send some blood to his legs. Like when people lock their knees and mess up circulation. Except I did it all at once. It was going to be one of my takedown moves when I became a hero. He should be up soon. Not even a minute later, and the man was coming to. Izuku, still lying face down on the floor, helpfully levitated a small bottle of water over to the man. What just happened? He asked, dazed as he sat back up. Sorry, Dr. Shield. Izuku mumbled. I didn't mean to do it. I just sorta went into fight or flight mode when you came at me, since, you just spent the last hour shooting me with rubber bullets. So I sent blood to your legs to make you pass out. David sighed as he got up and brushed himself off. Well, that's all right if it was a mistake. Lord knows Toshi has done far worse before he learned his own strength. And that was pretty clever of you to manipulate my blood. Just how fine is your control? Izuku finally got up too, when I'm not accidentally tripping people from anxiety or levitating UA with one for all. I trained my control to be really detailed. Mutant Quirk people are harder to deal with since their bodies can be altered, but I studied the anatomy of normal human beings really closely, so I'd be able to make someone faint or even tug on muscles to simulate really bad cramps and joint pain. I can even put strain on someone's eyes, forcing them to blink and lose visibility. Shield nodded along. That's very smart. Alarming, but smart. All Might just pulled his old buddy into a crushing side hug. See? I told you Midoriya was a little nerd. All Might, Izuku cried. It's a compliment. He defended, looking not at all sorry. Chapter 8. 3 idiots cause major property damage, then dodge the consequences. Chapter text. After that, Shield would pull Izuku in for tests every day while he was there on his trip to Japan. He'd run the numbers in between visits, theorizing on the Quirk science and giving whatever tips he could to Izuku about regulating his metaphysical output, whatever that meant. But at the end of the tests, the night before Shield had to take a plane back to Island, the inventor had handed him packet after packet of condensed and simplified data and scientific theories. After a few all-nighters spent at his desk, chair half propped back and a number of science journals floating around him, Izuku had to admit that he understood a bit more about the underlying mechanisms of his quirk, both old and new, than he did before, which, in turn, helped him come up with visualizations for it. It was his day spent with either Gran Torino or Sir Night-Eye, where he was allowed to actually put one for all into practice while in one of the lead-covered lab rooms. All Might had been banned from overseeing Quirk training alone after he left the door open, resulting in the school once more being floated. Which was, frankly, hilarious considering none of the other teachers had been informed of why it was floating, since OFA and Izuku's sudden power-up were currently being kept under wraps. It left them running around like chickens with their heads cut off, to Nedzu's unending delight. Instead, Yagi put his efforts towards buying a warehouse in Mizudafu and having it lined with lead. Stupidly expensive and a pain on such short notice, but, as Izuku had learned, the man was frugal when it came to his personal life. He probably owned one suit and all of 2 t-shirts. So, after years of being the number one and spending almost nothing on himself, he had long since gotten the money for such a ridiculous project. It was done just a few days before term started. Right then, All Might clapped. Show me what you got, son. Izuku nodded, turning to take in his surroundings in the warehouse, now a converted gym, and all the props that had been stuck around it. This was far bigger than the small labs UA had, and all manner of objects had been put inside. Some insanely dense in an attempt to find his weight limit, while some were extremely delicate to test how gentle his quirk could be with OFA. Other parts of the gym had been rigged with cameras and sensors to find out how fast he could move things, while others were designed to further test his fine control when it came to motion, with sensors able to read movement down to the millimeter. The only thing they couldn't test was his distance limit, the warehouse being too small for that, and them being unable to risk going outside unless they were somewhere completely isolated, which would have required longer than the day trips he'd been taking away from home. However, it was easy to say that Izuku had long since passed 50 meters, considering that the USJ was several miles away from his spot at the field. So at least they knew it was around the diameter of the USJ campus, considering no one had reported strange floating issues outside of the school. Thankfully, Izuku wasn't sure what they would have done if he'd lifted cars out the road and half a city block. Right now, though, Izuku didn't concern himself with the what-ifs. Instead, he let loose of OFA again and let everything float. All Might, who'd had the sense to tie himself down onto an anchor point on the floor, looking for all the world like a scrawny version of an All Might holiday parade float, looked around with a thoughtful expression on his face. Have you gotten better at controlling any of this? Izuku shook his head. I float everything at once, even if I try not to, but I'm still limited to concentrating on a dozen items and able to only direct those. Any more than that, and I can't keep up. Gran, what do you think? All Might asked, looking in the direction of the old man who was idly floating through the air, legs crossed, with not a care in the world. In fact, he looked to be having a lot of fun catching his orange chicken pieces out of the air with his chopsticks. I think, he said, after popping another one in his mouth, that the kid needs to stop thinking so damn hard. Huh, Izuku intelligently said. Gran gestured to his chicken. How many are there here? Up. Izuku quickly counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 5, 18. Yeah, now try putting them back on my plate. Izuku started moving a dozen at a time before Gran tossed a chopstick in his direction like a mini throwing knife with frightening speed and accuracy. Izuku yelped as he only barely managed to dodge the projectile. Not like that. Gran huffed. You're thinking too hard. You're thinking too small. What do you mean by that? If what I've heard in the last few days is a sign of anything, you've developed your quirk to take advantage of the smallest detail. You used fine control to make up for the fact that you didn't have raw force. So put that shiny zygote brain you've got in there to use and think for a second why that might be a problem. Izuku's face twisted up as he tried to figure it out. What was Torino getting at? His control was impeccable, down to the smallest vein and sliver of muscle fiber. He'd even been working on a new technique where he'd put pressure on the right nerves and force someone's muscles to flex. Like a doctor hitting the knee to make someone's leg jerk. He could disarm someone in a second like that, or force an emitter to miss their shot. It was impressive the amount of studying and thought put into his quirk. His concentration was higher than anyone else he knew. He could control every detail. Oh, I'm wasting my concentration? I don't need to control every object? Maybe. He hazarded a guess. Mr. Shield was always going on about larger and more general metaphysical movements. If Gran Torino was satisfied at his guess, he didn't show it, instead giving Izuku an impatient look. Well then, test it out already, and give me back my damn chopstick. Izuku nodded. He sent the chopstick back towards Gran before focusing back on the floating orange chicken. His senses naturally wanted to focus on each object and push them around individually, but, for once, Izuku let his hyper-focus drop and instead tried to perceive the world in a different way. It was odd. People could focus or unfocus their eyes. They could adjust their concentration to pick up certain sounds in a room full of noise or tune it out completely. They could even try to focus on the warmest parts of their body while ignoring the uncomfortable cold during winter and vice versa. But for this sense, it was like trying to use a whole hand to move objects around when Izuku had been metaphorically picking them up with just 2 fingers his whole life. Except, in this analogy, Izuku hadn't even had the whole hand until a few weeks ago. So, while Izuku had a lot of practice on focusing his quirk's sixth sense, he had decidedly less practice on unfocusing it. None, actually. If he didn't want to feel the overwhelming detail that came from his sixth sense, he simply turned off his quirk. He explained as much to Gran and All Might after a few minutes of struggling. So, if I'm getting this right, you need to do the opposite of clenching your glutes. All Might guessed. Izuku shrugged, I guess. Mental glutes, though. Well then, unclench them. All Might encouraged him. Gran jabbed a thumb in Yagi's direction. The buffoon makes it sound dumb, but he's got a point. Quirks are like a muscle. You just have to relax it. And hurry up, Brad. My chicken will get cold at this rate. So get them on my plate already. Chop chop. Why yes, sir, Izuku said, saluting, before once more putting his mind to not thinking too hard. After 20 minutes of trying and a few breathing exercises to relax the rest of his body, Izuku did his best to unfocus. Multiple tiny objects slowly became a larger collection in his mind. He would have done flips mid-air in his excitement if he didn't want to risk snapping out of this unfocused state. With his senses more encompassing like this, Izuku breathed in, then out, then pushed forwards lightly. Good news. All the chicken moved at once, bypassing his concentration limit. Bad news. Without his concentration manually keeping the chicken at a careful speed, they all went hurtling at the plate at blurring speeds far faster than chicken should physically go. They smashed into one super dense ball of orange chicken before smashing through the plate, taking the shards with them, and then kept going. It knocked past a floating block of concrete, then took a sheet of steel with it, which made it so much worse because suddenly it was a condensed bundle of metal too. And then the chicken, porcelain, and steel cannonball went hurtling at high speeds through the wall of lead in the gym and pierced a hole to the outside, which was suddenly not protected by lead. Oh crap! Midoriya shut off, one for all. Gran shouted. Izuku did immediately, and they all went tumbling to the ground. Both All Might and Gran managed to stick the landing, while Izuku landed flat on his back. Ouch! He groaned. Then he shot back up as he realized what he just did. I didn't do what I think I did I? He asked, a little green in the face at the thought. The car alarms and shouting outside say otherwise. All Might added. They were still for all of 2 seconds before all three of them went scrambling for the gym door at once. He and All Might tried to squeeze through at the same time, jamming them, at least until Gran vaulted over them and forcefully kicked All Might forwards on the way up, freeing him. Without being stuck, Izuku went stumbling. All Might caught him by his arm, but Gran looked ready to kick them both down again as they burst through the outside doors and looked at the chaos on the streets outside. Car alarms were going off from when dozens of cars had been picked up and dropped by who knows how many feet. Some were even tossed over, and a lot of them had their windows blown out. Half the people are sprawled out on the ground groaning, although thankfully, no one seemed too injured, while others had their hands wrapped around anything from telephone poles to fire hydrants. One teenage girl was even crying, babbling about how she hated heights. Up above, a kid was screaming down to a lady on the street, "Hey mom, look, I was floating and now I'm on the roof. Everything's so tiny up here." Don't mess around up there. Grab onto something and wait while I call the fire department." She screamed back, half panicked as she tried frantically jumping up to reach her phone, which had landed on a storefront awning. At least one food cart had been lifted in the chaos with noodles littering the sidewalk. Someone from an apartment window was screaming about their recliner sofa floating out the window, and Izuku turned red as he found it tossed on another person's balcony. Looking up and down the street, as far as he could see, no one on this block had been spared, and who knew how far it went. Somewhere down the street, Izuku could swear he faintly heard someone shout, "Damn it, Deku!" It wouldn't surprise him if someone from Aldera lived here and said it by force of habit. Not that anyone would know he'd actually done this. Nope, no siree. Gran reached up quick as lightning to smack the back of Izuku's head. Ow. You are so damn lucky no one updated your Quirk registry, because otherwise this would be the lawsuit from hell. No one says a damn thing about this, got it? He whisper-shouted. Both Izuku and Yagi paled significantly. Why yes, sir. They both stuttered out. And Toshi, quit whistling with your hands in your pocket. You look more suspicious that way. Why yes, sir. 0. If Mizudafu was abuzz with news of the mysterious floating, as the local news had dubbed it, well, that certainly had nothing to do with the extra renovations occurring at a nearby warehouse. Renovations that involved a large basement many meters underground and reinforced with concrete and double the lead. Nope, that had nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with Izuku. Chapter 9. Grand Theft Auto and Other Schoolyard Shenanigans. Chapter Text. Good news. The Mizudafu incident was widely reported, and so they got a good idea of just how far OFA could power up his telekinesis. Izuku could now float anything in a 6-mile-wide circle. Less good news. It had been unanimously decided that until Izuku got a hang of controlling One for All, he wouldn't use it outside of tests. That meant that for his first days at UA, and until further notice, he'd just be using his normal telekinesis, without any aid from his vast power source of a quirk. So, back to the 15-ounce limit. That didn't bother Izuku too much, though, which brought him to some quirk apprehension test, which he did surprisingly well in. Midoriya, you came first during the entrance exam. Take this ball and throw it as far as you can. Do whatever you need to, just don't leave the circle, his teacher, Aizawa-sensei, said tiredly. Izuku took it and felt the ball in his hand, weighing it with a thoughtful expression. Thoughts of disassembling and then floating over the pieces of an air cannon from a nearby exercise field crossed his mind, but he quickly discarded those. As fun as that sounded, there was a simpler method. The ball was slightly heavier than his ounce limit, but, well, it was a small ball. Just a little trimming would do. Yeah, okay, I got this, Izuku said, half to the class and half to himself. With a small twist of his quirk, the screws holding together the measuring device to the rest of the ball fell off. With that done, he was left with just the band in the middle. He hummed happily as he weighed it again, finding it just under the ounce limit. You might want to cover your ears, Izuku warned as he glanced over to the gaggle of students watching on in anticipation. Bakugo, funnily enough, listened immediately, his training having gotten to the point where he just instinctively listened when Izuku got that look in his eyes. And the rest of the class, despite having only known each other for a matter of minutes, followed the explosive boy's lead. After all, if even Bakugo didn't protest, there must be a good reason for it. Satisfied, Izuku lifted the device with his quirk, aimed it at the best angle, and then shot it forwards as fast as he could. And it was fast. Izuku might have been limited to just a few measly ounces, but speed was almost no issue. If he could concentrate on the item and its movement enough, he could theoretically move it as fast as he could imagine. In an instant, he shot the ball to his limit of 50 meters in a fraction of a second, at a speed of over 200 meters per second. The displaced air boomed, sounding almost as loud as one of Kaken's explosions, except with a high-pitched whistle added on. Izuku had done his research. Right now, this was his top speed. It was around as fast as some small, low-caliber guns were, and more than half as fast as the speed needed to break the sound barrier. After that, the device's momentum carried itself on its own. Then they waited, and waited, for over half a minute. At some point, he'd heard excited speculation on what his quirk was before Aizawa shut them up as the numbers came in. 5,874.4 meters. If Aizawa found that impressive, he didn't show it. Besides, maybe a slight twitch of an eyebrow, but it was gone before Izuku could be sure. His classmates, however, were much more vocal. What the hell, Deku? You could do that shit all this time, Kaken said, cheery as ever. Izuku sent him an innocent smile and a look, and the other boy immediately glanced down at his white gym shoes, which didn't have laces. Realizing this, he turned red but didn't go crazy violent and instead just stood there stewing in his embarrassment. Izuku pulled a Butterfingers out of his pocket and floated it to Kaken in a much more tame arc. The blonde took it and puffed up his cheeks in honestly adorable anger before shoving it in his mouth. Some red-headed kid piped up, loud enough to be heard over the others. Man, is that how you got first place in the exam? That's insane. From the way he had a motivated shine in his eyes, Izuku took that as a compliment. The good kind of insane, probably. But while it had crossed Izuku's mind to use projectiles in his fighting before, he hadn't tried at the exam, too worried he'd overshoot or lose control and hurt someone. This was his first time actually getting to test himself to his limits and see how feasible it would be. And he was pretty happy about it, even if he just knew his power and distance limit and not his accuracy. Enough, his sensei said, cutting everyone off. Even Izuku, who hadn't realized he'd been mumbling about the high-speed projectile potential of his quirk until just then. Moving on, Aizawa said, we have 8 tests to get through. Don't waste time ranting about every quirk you see. Then, he turned away and everyone was forced to follow. 0. Once again, no matter how useless Izuku's quirk first seemed, he proved that telekinesis was extremely versatile. Running was interesting. He could trip everyone up with a few choice rocks to make his score look better, but that wasn't very sportsmanlike. So he settled on taking advantage of what UA had to offer. Literally. Having been on campus for quite a while, he knew where everything was. Before it was his turn for the 50-meter run, he had sent a text to Yagi. Cryptid Dove minor inconveniences. Would you mind if I borrow something of yours for class? A minute later, the man responded. Hashtag 1DQFN. Go ahead, thumbs up. He probably thought Izuku was talking about a pen or eraser, and the boy didn't see fit to correct him. So, Izuku quickly snuck away from the group and closer to the main building until he could sense the objects inside. It was trivial work floating a set of car keys from the office where Yagi worked in and through a window. It was also easy to float those keys to the nearby teacher parking lot and put them in the ignition, using his quirk to step on the gas and steer little by little towards his spot by the track. By the time it was Deku's turn, he had somehow procured a car out of nowhere. His phone was going off in his pocket, but he studiously ignored that. Bakugo was pissed, his hands clenching and unclenching with many explosions. How the fuck am I supposed to compete with that? Sensei, how can this be allowed? The blue-haired boy, the one who had a habit of yelling at Izuku, said with a hand chopping through the air. Aizawa shrugged, then looked at Izuku. Did you use your quirk to get it? Izuku nodded and brought the keys back out, jingling them mid-air with his quirk for show. Yup. Got permission and everything, so you can't arrest me for vehicular theft. Sensei let out a long, suffering sigh. I wish Zashi had gotten you. He murmured to himself. I can tell you'll be a problem child. Izuku just grinned brightly as he hopped in the car's seat, buckled up, and put the car into gear. He got it to the starting line where Bakugo was standing, staring at him with a mixture of rage but mostly disbelief. As if he couldn't believe Izuku would pull this shit. Which was dumb. Of course he would. Rolling down the window, Izuku leaned out and yelled, Ready, teach? The man ran a hand down his face and groaned. Yeah, go. Izuku slammed his foot down on the gas. A little annoyed, he had to lean down some to reach the pedal, and then he was off. Bakugo had gotten a head start, his quirk suited for sudden fast movement. But as soon as the car was accelerating, he zoomed far past the boy. How'd I do, sensei? He asked, earnestly after he'd come to a stop in his kind of but not really stolen car, looking for all the world like he'd just done a simple sprint and not that. 2.40 seconds. Aizawa said. Bakugo huffed as he finished his race and came up to them. What? About me? He gasped out. 4.13 seconds. Bakugo shoved his hands across his face, tilted his head skyward, and screamed into his palms. Fuck you, Deku. Aizawa took one look at that, then to the car, then back, and tossed his stopwatch to the side. We're moving on. But sensei, the pink girl, Mina, cried out. We haven't finished testing everyone for the dash. However, his back was turned and he was already walking away, moving on, is all he said. Izuku took that opportunity to check his texts to find All Might flooding his phone with notifications. Hashtag 1DQFN. Young Midoriya, is that my CAR? Hashtag 1DQFN Midoriya. Hashtag 1DQFN. Midoriya, can you even drive? Hashtag 1DQFN. Good job on the test. Hashtag 1DQFN. Don't tell Naitai about this. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows as he looked around the training grounds. Finding nothing, he tapped a message into his phone. Cryptid Dove minor inconveniences. Are you spying on me? Hashtag 1DQFN. Yes, but that is besides the point. Cryptid Dove minor inconveniences. GTG. Aizawa is calling on me for the distance run. THX for the car. Hashtag 1DQFN. Wait, Midoriya. But before he could read the rest of his mentor's texts, Izuku silenced, then pocketed his phone and climbed back into the car. Needless to say, he won the distance run. 0. The grip test passed with him floating the device over to a nearby gym, where he forcefully wedged it under a pile of weights equaling 314 kilograms, landing him solidly in second place for that test. The standing long jump wasn't hard after he floated out the pieces of a pole from storage. This is a jumping competition, Midoriya, not a vaulting one, Aizawa reminded him. But I did jump from a standing position. I just also happened to hoist myself up a little higher and further with the use of something I floated over with my quirk. He pointed out, perfectly polite. Aizawa closed his eyes and brought his fingers up to massage the bridge of his nose, where there was no doubt a headache coming on. Sure, whatever. A little later, and some borrowed trampolines helped recreate the idea, he saw that short boy, Mineta, pull off. He couldn't really bullshit his way through the toe touch, but he got the last laugh during the sit-ups. All he had to do was bring out the lawn chair from All Might's car trunk, which he knew was there because Yagi always liked to sit back and watch the waves on the beach as Izuku struggled to haul around several tons of trash behind him. That adjusted with just a 2-ounce screw on each side, which he could easily handle. It was still sit-ups, even if it was just him using his quirk to fold and unfold the chair with him on it, right? He's pretty sure he saw Aizawa just throw up his hands at that point and walk away, muttering something about homerooms, verb conjugations, and noisy cockatoos. And people thought Izuku was weird. Ridiculous. Hey, you're at 200, sit-ups now. The nice girl who was holding down his feet said. The same girl he'd rescued at the entrance exam, Uraraka. Thanks for reminding me, he said, perking up. That should probably be enough, right? Uh-huh. I think you've beat everyone else by now, she said. Right then. I guess I'm done, Izuku said, clapping his hands and smiling brightly at her as he climbed off and picked up the Endeavor-themed lawn chair, tucking it under his arm. He whistled the Mighty Man cartoon theme song as he strode out of the gym to toss it back into All Might's car, which he totally hadn't stolen, without a care in the world to the stares he was getting, or the burst of fire coming off the side of one embarrassed Todoroki. He was definitely not the weird one. Chapter 10. What happened in Tijuana, and why Izuku is Saminta's worst nightmare. All Might may or may not have taken Izuku out to teach him how to actually drive after the apprehension test, which was how Izuku ran a red light and got pulled over by a cop. Oh crap, the fuzz. All Might squawked. Then, quicker than Izuku could blink, he bodily grabbed the boy and picked him up off the driver's seat. Getting into the seat himself and then plopping his charge into the passenger's seat, he yelled to Izuku, I don't have you on the insurance, so just play along. But Izuku was still stuck on something else. Did you just say, oh crap, the fuzz? You, the symbol of peace. Look, he hissed as his eyes darted from Izuku to where he could see a cop approaching from the rear-view mirror. I wasn't always the #1 hero. My college days were, a little crazy. Just ask David. Actually, don't. He'll tell you about Tijuana, and you don't want to know what happened in Tijuana. Izuku looked at his hero in sheer disbelief. What the heck happened in Tij? Officer, such a fine day today. All Might, or rather, Yagi Tashinori, said loudly. How can I help you? Izuku began to panic as he watched his mentor freeze. Oh god, was this a big shot that All Might knew? Did they just get in a lot of shit with the biggest, baddest cop in the city? What trouble could they be in for All Might to be cowed? The plain-faced cop took one look at Yagi and narrowed his eyes, as if he wasn't seeing things right. Toshi. Hey, sweetie, Yagi nervously said. Sweetie? Dumbfounded, the man looked from Yagi, who he apparently knew, then to Izuku, then to Yagi. Should I even ask why my husband is driving around an unknown, innocent child? Husband, Izuku cried out. Innocent child? Yagi yelled in, frankly, an offensive amount of disbelief. This is the kid I told you about now. You know, my successor. He muttered that last part under his breath, even holding his hand up in a comical stage whisper, although he was doing it 100% unironically. He knows about One for All? Izuku asked. He was resolutely ignored. Now choked, the one that floated the city. He shouted. Izuku actually shouted, whirling on Yagi, incredulous. You told the cops. Just a cop. All Might defended, the one I'm married to. Izuku put his face in his hands. Oh my god. He heard the cop take in a long, deep breath before exhaling slowly. Then, okay, I get it. This isn't an innocent child. This is the twerp Torino keeps referencing, and probably also the little shit Aizawa just texted me about. Did I ever tell you how smart you are now? All Might tried weakly. I don't have to be a literal detective to put it together. And your compliment isn't getting you out of a ticket. Also, we'll be having words later. Yagi sighed before leaning back in his chair. All right, fair. Good on you for accepting responsibility and future discussion. The detective said. Izuku nearly died when he saw the man hand All Might a juice pack. The hero took it with a pout before sticking in the straw and drinking. Holy crap, the conditioning spread to his husband too. 10 minutes later, and Yagi had his ticket. Detective Tsukachi Naomesa, as Izuku learned his full name was, left with the promise that they all go out for lunch later so he could get to know the boy his husband was training to take on his quirk. Then the two were just left staring straight ahead in silence. Yagi was the one to break it. At least he didn't ask who was driving. I pulled the switcheroo on him once before and man, was he not happy. Izuku choked. I'm sorry, this isn't the first time you've gotten pulled over by your husband? His mentor just shook his head. Unfortunately not. Then, with a faraway look, his mentor muttered so quietly that Izuku could barely hear it. Tijuana. Fucking Tijuana. 0. In any case, driving lessons weren't over, but Yagi had taken to using the school's mock cities as a way to teach Izuku instead. How he convinced the principal to let them do that was beyond Izuku. But his days resumed as normal, and the next time he was at school, they were having mock training battles. Izuku ended up with Uraraka, which was good with him. But he made sure to keep track of the balls in each box, and, with a little nudge of his telekinesis, he made sure Bakugu's team would get paired up with someone else. He'd been messing with Katsuki his whole life already. Although it was fun, this was about training and he'd want a challenge so he could learn something new. Instead, he made sure to get paired up against Todoroki and Shoji's team, two of the strongest of his classmates that he wanted to test his skills against, especially since Shoji had a mutant quirk, something Izuku struggled with. The first teams to fight will be these guys, All Might shouted as he pulled out the balls with a dramatic flourish. Bakugu and Ida as the villains versus Mina and Aoyama as the heroes. Villains, to your battle stations. Bakugu was all fired up and ready to go, spewing out cocky threats the whole way, which Ida tried to tame. Meanwhile, the rest of the students filed into an impressive observation room. Minutes passed with them idly talking about who they thought would win, with the two hero team students strategizing in the corner until the planning time had passed. Heroes, to your stations, All Might called, dramatically pointing to the exit. See ya, Mina said as she practically skipped away. Watch our match. I'm sure it'll be spectacular, Aoyama added. Izuku could practically see sparkles around the boy. Then, a huge screen lit up, which got a few oohs and ahs around him. Izuku watched as Bakugu clenched and unclenched his fists into fiery, little explosions. As they finished hiding the bomb, the students got to hear the last of their strategy. Apparently Ida would be the one guarding the fake bomb as he was the faster one, while Bakugu went on the offensive. Which should have worked. Bakugu had quickly torn down the halls with explosions thrusting him forwards and threats ringing out through the building. Come at me, you pansies, he growled. And then he rounded the corner, came across Mina, and he froze, breaking out into a cold sweat instantly and shaking a little as he tried to raise his fist. Die? He asked. It got a lot of concerned muttering from his peers. Even Mina had stopped and was looking at him weirdly. Izuku took one look at this scene and nodded in understanding. Right. Well, I know the problem. Hold on. Taking the microphone from his mentor's hand, he tried to reassure the boy. It's okay. Kaken, you can get violent when it's a school spar. Bakugu visibly relaxed. Oh, thank God. Wait, why am I listening to you? Shoo, just pretend I'm giving you a Kit Kat. Then, without any further words, Izuku returned the mic to his dumbfounded teacher and went back to his place with an equally dumbfounded class. Bakugu's battle with Mina was victorious, although he did end up with half his costume sizzling from acid, and Ida successfully outran Aoyama. After their win, Katsuki had marched into the training room a little worse for wear and grumpy. Izuku just handed him a small bag of M&Ms. I thought I was getting a Kit Kat, he grumbled. Izuku just patted him on the head. I said pretend you're getting one. I'm actually out of those right now. Whatever, nerd. A small silence settled between them. Then, "You're a good dog, Kakin." "What? What?" "0. Hero Team Midoriya and Uraraka. To your stations." They took their positions outside. Once there, his partner turned to him. "All right, Deku," Uraraka said, clapping her hands together as she looked at him. "While I'm very worried to ask this, I've seen you come up with some creative solutions. So what V you got for us?" Izuku's face split into a wide, Cheshire grin with just a hint of madness in it. "I'm glad you asked." Uraraka gulped. "Yua, you see, this is why I was worried. But tell me anyways," she said, psyching herself up. "Okay, so you can take away gravity with 5-point touch, right?" "Right, but only solid matter. But you can float multiple objects at once as long as they're touching the original object you used your quirk on," he stated more than asked. Yes, actually. For example, the robots at the exam were made up of a bunch of parts, and they all lifted even though I only touched the outer shell of one arm or leg. But I do have to think a little about what I want to float so that not everything that's touching goes with it," she offered. Izuka nodded. "That's what I thought. As long as it's connected, then anything goes." "Okay, that's my quirk, but I'm curious, Deku. What's yours?" "Oh, I can use telekinesis on anything under 15 ounces. Her jaw dropped. "What? That's your quirk? But you did all that crazy stuff." Then she waved her arms around frantically for emphasis, trying to mimic the shooting ball and the folding of a lawn chair admirably. Izuka shrugged. "Yeah. What about the car, then?" "I just levitated the car keys." "And the crazy ball toss?" She pushed, half hysteric. "I mean, you did better with yours," he said, nonchalant. "Yeah, because I can defy gravity and send things into the sun, not because I can lift 15 ounces. Well, I can lift 15 ounces really, really fast if that helps." "Okay, but what about?" "Uraraka," he cut in. "We're wasting time. Don't you realize we're an unstoppable team with our quirks? Remember the entrance exam?" She suddenly looked a little green. "Do I?" "That piece of rubble trapping you was huge. But by tapping on it, you made it weightless and bypassed my ounce requirement. That's how I was able to crash it into the 0-pointer." Her eyes widened as she came to the realization Izuku was guiding her towards. "I can't move the things I float once they're out of reach, but you can. And really, really fast too. And you can't move anything heavy, but I make things not heavy." Then she turned crestfallen. But, but, I'll just get quirk sickness again if it's too much." Izuku smiled, putting his hands on her shoulders reassuringly. "Don't worry, I've got a plan for that. We just need to get the bomb and capture the villains." "All right, I'm nervous, but I trust you on this. I mean, you've been able to come up with a plan for everything else. That's got to count for something," she said, pushing through her nervousness and getting a shine back in her eyes. "What do you have in mind?" "Here," the madness returned. "How do you feel about floating a building?" 0. When they were ready, Izuku and Uraraka approached the building. They had to jump back as the ground floor and surrounding area was coated with a 4-inch thick sheet of ice, but other than that, they were in the clear. Izuka nodded and gave her a thumbs up to show he was ready, which she returned. Then, she planted her whole hand onto the side of the building. At the same time, Izuku focused on her internal organs. Carefully, he applied a soothing pressure to her stomach. Similar to a compression bandage, he kept down the effects of inflammation that would have caused her to get nauseous. He didn't miss the way her blood vessels constricted in a way that normally would have caused a headache, and he did his best to soothe those too. Izuku, of course, kept what he was doing quiet. He might have been studying the body since he got his quirk and developed his sixth sense to pick out grains of sand, but that didn't mean people were comfortable in just trusting their health to him. It was absolutely not moral, but dealing with All Might's internal bleeding on the regular had made him somewhat used to just using it without asking, which was probably bad. Probably. Then Uraraka's quirk took effect, and his sixth sense felt the way the whole building and anything attached inside turned weightless. Now, he could have just knocked out Todoroki with a locked knees of justice, tied up Shoji with the capture tape he'd been given, and floated the bomb through a window and into their waiting arms. But no, Izuku was not known as a cryptid for nothing. He was a little shit and dramatic about it too. So while Uraraka made paltry things like physics optional, Izuku decided to bring flair to this challenge. With a nudge of his quirk, the mock building floated straight off its foundations. In his earpiece, he heard All Might squawk, "Not again. Young Midoriya, you shouldn't make a habit of this." Izuku snorted. He hadn't even used OFA. This was totally different. Then, with another twist of his quirk, the whole building raised a few meters more and then turned upside down. "Whoa," Uraraka said in awe beside him, looking a little pale and queasy but nowhere near where she should have been doing something on this level. Izuku looked over to her, a brightness to his eyes that almost shined. "Your quirk is really amazing, Uraraka." She returned his bright grin. Thank you. Yours is too." Happy, Izuku turned back around and started shaking the building like a kid trying to knock out the last few Legos to his toy set. A multi-story, concrete toy set where the Legos were two of his classmates and a fake bomb. "Be ready to capture them. They'll be coming from the third-floor window, second to the right," Izuku warned as he felt flailing movement through his sixth sense. In their panic, he doubted they noticed the way he used his telekinesis to slide open the window. Uraraka nodded. "On it." Then she ran to her position and held her arm at the ready, finger pads touching the bundle, activating her quirk, and muscles flexing as she got ready to toss out her capture tape. "I'm forcing them out in 3, 2, 1. Right at that moment, Izuku brought Todoroki and Shoji crashing out the window, purposefully shoving Shoji right on top of Todoroki so the boy couldn't use his impressive elemental quirk without harming him. "Oof," he heard both of them grunt. Oddly quiet for being body slammed out of a floating building, but he supposed they both came across as the reserved type, even when training. Then he quickly turned them around so they couldn't see Uraraka on the ground, waiting to capture them. Said hero student reeled back and threw the capture tape. Her aim was true and steady, her capture weapon wrapping around its target like the lasso it was designed after. From their shocked yells, Shoji and Todoroki hadn't even known what hit them. The bomb came plinking out of the building not a moment later, and Izuku floated it towards him. In a last bit of showmanship, he stuck the huge thing on his finger and started spinning it like a basketball trick. Uraraka giggled as she looked from her classmates, who were floating from the capture tape like a balloon, then to Izuku spinning the prop. "You're really good at that," she said. Izuku smiled, ignoring the incredulous look from his classmates and All Might's guffawing in his ear. "Thanks. You have a good arm." And then, over the speakers, Hero Team Midoriya and Uraraka win. Chapter 11. Well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. Chapter text. Izuku ducked his head as his class made their way back to their classroom, doing his best to not attract the attention of one grumbly Cementos, who was marching in the direction they had just come from with his hands and fists. He made out a few of the man's grumbles as he strode past them. "Can't believe it. Third time this month. I'm just the foundation repairman now. How does this keep happening? That rat. I just want my pension." Izuku wisely decided that he'd keep mum about this for as long as possible. Word was bound to get around, but surely not too soon. Besides, he couldn't pin the first two instances at UA on Izuku when he didn't even have Uraraka with him. And with the registry still not updated, Cementos would be left suspicious but not able to confirm it. It'd probably be safer for green-haired boys the world round that way. He didn't miss how All Might ducked his head as well. Gran, for all his stubbornness, probably would have too. 0. Izuku helped Uraraka to the nurse's office after they'd gotten their stuff from class. There, Recovery Girl gave her some medicine to help the girl with her nausea. However, Izuku stuck around, keeping the pressure of his quirk on the right places until the medication started doing his work for him. Only then did he ease up on it. But it was a pleasant half hour as Uraraka and Izuku talked all about their team up and the potentials of their quirks combined. "We'd be really good rescue heroes together, you know," she said. Izuku eagerly nodded. "That was actually what I wanted to focus on too. I mean, I have tricks up my sleeves where I could be a combat hero, but my quirk has a sort of sixth sense to it, where I can feel anything around me that I can levitate in a 50-meter radius. I'd be really good at finding people trapped in burning buildings or under rubble, and I can sort of direct particles out of the air like ash." Uraraka looked at him with wide eyes. Wow, I never would have guessed you could do so much with a quirk like yours. You'll be a really good hero, Deku. Then, she turned a little more timid, wringing her hands together. Would you? Would you mind helping me with my quirk? I mean, you put together the multiple objects in contact thing and learned how to use your quirk with mine within just a few minutes of knowing me. You're really good at that stuff. He met her expression with a blindingly bright one. I'd love to. 0. A week later, and they were putting his ideas and their quirks to work while practicing in the USJ. 13 was absolutely delighted with them. Right now, they were being set to work in the conflagration zone. They were suited up in blue, fire-resistant clothing with reflective silver decals forming the UA logo on them, like a mix between a firefighter's uniform and their school-issued gym clothes. Hard hats were worn over their head atop the hood and full-face ventilator mask they had to wear, sending up a truckload of civilians. Uraraka called through her comms as she tapped the side of a Prop 18-wheeler that they'd filled with dummies. Amidst the waves of heat, the smoke, and the flames reflected on her glass visor, Ochako could only watch in wonder as she saw the massive truck take to the sky and be gently pushed by Izuku to the other side of the dome, where the mock relief area was set up. She didn't think she could ever get tired of seeing things like this, especially since Izuku had a way to soothe her symptoms. A few days ago, he'd drawn her away and told her the gist, offering to stop, but, well, the friendly, helpful, and scarily clever boy she knew wouldn't do that if he didn't know what he was doing. And after he presented his year's worth of both Quirk and anatomy notebooks to her, she'd given him the go-ahead. So all was good. They were absolutely killing it in the USJ and had scored top points in every zone they'd visited so far, including the snowstorm and mountain ones. Then, with the clanging of a bell, the fire in the zone suddenly stopped spewing from the many flamethrower turrets scattered about. The fireproof prop trees looked unharmed beside some smog stains on them, and the trees and small buildings that had fallen over were easily rectified by levers in the ground. Students, 13 cheerily called through the speakers. You may exit the simulation now. Uraraka and Izuku looked at each other with matching smiles under their masks, both revealed as they started pulling off their headgear as they walked. You think we got full points? Izuku asked. I sure hope so, Uraraka said, putting her hands to her cheeks and squealing in her giddiness, even if it left smudge marks behind. Although he couldn't talk, his first reaction had been to wipe the sweat off his forehead, and now there was a big, black mark there. My parents and siblings are going to be so excited when they hear about this. Uraraka cheered. 13 met them at the door, holding it open for them and letting them step out into the central area of the USJ. Well? Uraraka asked with anticipation clear on her face and in her voice. Izuku could practically see stars in her eyes. Their rescue teacher spoke happily. You two did so great. You'll make amazing rescue heroes when you graduate. Keep this up, and I'll make sure you two get an invite to work at my agency when internships come around. Uraraka squealed again, and Izuku couldn't stop the way his face broke out into a grin. As if answering to his happiness, his quirk plucked a few flowers from a nearby grass patch and floated them around his head in a little dance. That's really awesome. Thank you, 13-sensei, Izuku said, bowing again and again, which Uraraka took to copying. 13 laughed lightly before she patted them gently on the back. All right, you two. Change out of those outfits and hit the showers. Izuku perked up then. Oh, right. Sensei, can I please take a break outside the USJ for a bit? It's cooler there. She tilted her head in thought before making a humming noise in agreement. I don't see why not. You finished this zone early, so you can take a 15-minute break. Just be back before the next activity. You'll be doing the water zone next. That set Izuku into another set of bows. Thank you, sensei. Then he waved to both his teacher and Uraraka as he headed towards the boys' locker rooms. Changing out of his smoke-covered outfit, he shoved them in the laundry chute before entering the showers. Oh hey, Midoriya, is that you? I heard you've been doing really good, Mineta said from the other stall. Izuku nodded, even though he knew the other boy couldn't see it. Yeah, he said excitedly. Me and Uraraka make a good team. Hey, that's really great. All I've done good in is the mountain rescue, Mineta complained. Well, your quirk is suited for mobility. Izuku reasoned. You guys talking about the zones? Denki piped up. Man, all I've done is be a glorified power source to fix backup generators. And I flat out failed the water test because I panicked when they turned the waves on and almost electrocuted Gyru. At least you all got paired up with girls. Mineta complained. Izuku helpfully tossed a bar of soap over the stall's wall, using his quirk to give it a little nudge towards his target. Ow! Mineta cried as it hit him on the head. Bad, Mineta. Bad, he said. Izuku sighed. Now he had another classmate to train. 0. Quickly finishing his shower so he could use the leftover minutes to take a break outside, Izuku changed back into the hero costume his mom made him. It was still in perfect condition from his fight with Todoroki and Shoji, although now it had a few smudges from the mountain rescue when he'd taken a small tumble. But the cool new improvements the school made by adding support items, things like a mask, leg braces, and stronger gloves, more than made up for it. Izuku kept the mask and hood off for now, though. Instead, heading to the edge of the huge building and pushing open the exit doors to the USJ, he happily breathed in the fresh air. That's nice, he sighed pleasantly. Wanting to stretch his muscles in a way that wasn't running through drastic terrains, Izuku set off for a nice, sedate walk. Which, of course, ended 10 minutes later when he happened upon a group of 30 villains looking wildly around the giant hole in the ground where the USJ had previously been. You know, before Izuku accidentally lifted it and plopped it 100 meters in the wrong direction. Where is it? The USJ is supposed to be here? Hirojiri, try again. You obviously got the coordinates wrong. Sir, I've already warped us 5 separate times. Then, because the world occasionally had to knock him down a peg or two to stop him from getting a god of mischief and convoluted plans complex, one of the villains actually spotted him. Hey, boss. A gun finger-wielding villain spoke. There's a student right there. Should we ask him? The boss spun around to face Izuku, and the boy couldn't help but cringe back. Not in fear but disgust. Ew, he said out loud. Loud enough for everyone down in the crater to hear him. God, he could just kick himself. The supervillain, a man with hair far too greasy and lips too chappy to be called pretty, even by his mother, recoiled in slight affront before seeming to remember he was a villain. Hey, you there. You're gonna be the NPC that gives quest information or we kill you. So where's the USJ? He called up towards Izuku. And then, instead of the millions of things Izuku could have said in that situation, he threw away his already non-existent impulse control and blurted out, "Oh, I accidentally moved it earlier." Izuku froze as the leader turned stock still and the 36 villains surrounding him turned all their attention on him. Oh, he was in deep shit now, wasn't he? Wait, he started. The leader cut in, "You moved it?" Izuku gulped, no. The villain with the gun fingers aimed at him and fired a warning shot at his feet, causing Izuku to flailing jump away from the smoldering hole in the ground. Yes. Then his hands shot to his big, stupid mouth to cover it up. Powerful. Sensei will want him. He heard the villain say to himself, looking away in thought. Izuku trembled a little. Want a Kit Kat, doggy? He managed. Do I want a what? The boss asked, incredulous, as he whirled his gaze back around to Izuku's position. But Izuku had already turned tail and booked it in that brief moment of confusion, trying to run as far as possible from whatever the heck he'd just landed himself into. Behind him, he heard the leader shout, "Well, get him." Then he heard 30-something villains clamoring over each other to get out of the pit and on his trail. Huh. Izuku had never thought of himself as a runner before. He was short, after all, but he thought he could qualify for the Olympics like this. Go figure. Chapter 12, 30 Career Villains vs. One Floaty Boy. Was this fear? Izuku wondered. It had been a while. He hadn't had anything to fear since his quirk came in. It was seemingly useless, but he could screw over his bullies all the livelong day with it. And even when the silly putty from hell came after him, he was already well prepared for that. And he was reasonably sure UA's zero-pointer wouldn't actually be allowed to curb stomp him. So the slightly unfamiliar feeling in his chest was a bit of a mystery. If this was fear, it sucked. Izuku breathed harshly as he twisted his way through the forested areas of UA campus. So far, he'd done okay shoving rocks at people and hitting their eyes with dirt, but he was running out of stamina and their overwhelming numbers would catch up to him soon. And a dozen rocks, no matter how fast, couldn't knock out all of them once that happened. He could also only use his locked knees trick on one or two people at a time, and a good amount of those villains were mutants with unknown anatomy, rendering that particular trick too dangerous to try on them. He couldn't even use one for all, not when the school was filled with students. His own classmates were in dangerous terrains right at that moment. If he turned on his quirk, he'd send not only them, but the zones and everything in them, floating out of control with his friends right in the middle. Oh man, I am so screwed. He coughed out in between gasps. Izuku heaved in another burning breath as he ran, desperately trying to plan, only to be interrupted by a spike of hair flinging out to impale him. Shit, he shouted as he dodged, then swerved to the left to avoid another one. Man, had his reflexes always been this good? Shit, 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 shit. He yelped as each weaponized needle of hair soared after him, barely missing him as he jerked to dodge each one. Risking a glance back, he saw the villainess that was flinging out her hair had mostly human anatomy. Taking the chance, he focused his quirk backwards 30 feet to where she was in pursuit. Squeezing with all 15 ounces of measly force, he shouted, "Locked knees of justice." She went crashing to the ground a few seconds later. Turning to his right, Izuku had just enough time to dodge someone with a massive muscle augment quirk before calling out, "Reflexes of victory," and tugging harshly on a ligament. The man's knee suddenly jerked, sending him sprawling to the ground. Another villain was jumping from the trees at him. Dirt of defeat, and a cloud of dirt went flying into the man's eyes. "Ah crap, you little brat," the villain shouted as he let go of the branch he was swinging from to cover his eyes, falling to the ground in the process. Sorry. Then he remembered these people were trying to kidnap and or kill him. Wait, no. I take that back. Not sorry, he shouted over his shoulder. Izuku looked forwards again, just in time to jump over a villain burrowing towards him from the ground with clawed, mole hands. Jumping on his head like a springboard, Izuku screamed, "Migraine of righteousness," and forced the blood vessels to his head to contract painfully. Then he was running again, huffing even harder. Lesson learned, leave the super move screaming for when he's doing less cardio. He kept going, getting frustrated and even more scared as he realized some of the villains he knocked down were coming back. If it continued like this, he'd have to use more and more dangerous moves, and he didn't want to hurt anyone severely, not even villains. That's not what a hero does. Izuku just really wished All Might was here. The man would have known what to do, but he had been late to the USJ. He'd probably used up all his time. But if Yagi were here, he would have noticed Izuku was gone right away. He would have come to save him. He would have solved all of this with one punch. Izuku yelped as a villain finally got in a hit with a ball of flame, the force of it sending him to the ground. Both the fire-quirked villain and another villain were closing in fast, one huge and made of metal. Izuku scrambled to get up, but a heavy boot planted itself on his back and shoved him back down, hard. No laces. Damn. Izuku tried chucking a rock into the man's face, but it bounced off his jagged, steel-like body. In his desperation, he tried searching through the man's anatomy, mutation be damned. But, to his horror, he couldn't find any sort of circulatory system he could bend or compress. Not even nerves. No, it looked like the man's internal organs were just as dense and steely as his external body was. No fair, he said, even as he wheezed and ate dirt. My one weakness, anything heavier than a coffee mug. Then he saw a familiar pair of gun-tipped fingers and wisely shut up. 0. By the time the leader had caught up, his cronies had already surrounded him. Izuku had made at least one more person faint before the mole villain with claws swiped him painfully across the chest as a warning. Now there were 5, awful, deep, and probably very infected from dirt, gouges across his chest, bleeding too fast for him to stem completely with his quirk. You stupid NPC, you're quickly becoming more trouble than you're worth. So if you want even a chance to live, you'll answer my questions, the leader said as he stepped dangerously close to Izuku. And if you don't, The man shot his hand out to the tree Izuku had been propped again. Izuku watched in horror as the thing began to turn gray under the man's hand, quickly forming flakes of dust that just spread further and further. Within seconds, the dust was eating away the tree in both directions, and Izuku could only watch as it disintegrated away. Then it disintegrated behind him too, and Izuku fell backwards onto the ground with a dull thump. A pained groan forced its way out of his mouth, one he quickly stifled as he realized he was laying on the ground on the ashes of the tree that man had just destroyed with one touch. And said man was now crouched over him, hand hovering just over Izuku's neck. "Oh crap," Izuku whispered, getting a flurry of ash in his mouth for his troubles. "Yes, oh crap," the villain snarked. "So tell me how you move the USJ, and I might let you live." Izuku coughed up the ash and turned to the side to spit the residue out before staring back up at the villain. The gears were turning furiously, frantically in his head. "I picked it up and floated it over there," he said, pointing in the absolutely opposite direction of the USJ. He looked up. "Over there." Izuku shoved the villain's hand away with his telekinesis before rapidly bringing both his legs up and kicking the man square in the chest. He flipped around and sprung to his feet, running as fast as he could and ignoring the spluttering behind him. "Huh, sucks to be you." It became a little less funny when a gunshot sound from behind him was followed by a quick, violent, and awful sensation in his shoulder. The force of it jerked him forward and almost sent him stumbling to the ground had his adrenaline not been going haywire for the first time in 10 years. He made it all of 20 steps out of the ring of villains, forcing them to faint as the ones in front of him tried to catch him, before he heard the supervillain scream. "Damn it, Kurogiri. Just handle this already." "As you wish, young master." Izuku barely had time to wonder what that meant before a swirling vortex of purple and black spread out from in front of him. What the shit was that? Izuku got his answer when a hand shot out of it, pinky raised, interestingly enough, and grabbed onto his shirt before he could dodge. He yelped as it yanked him forwards and tugged him through the smog. And then Izuku was right back where he started, in the middle of 36 villains who would probably kill him if they got annoyed enough. After all that, and he'd just gotten a bullet wound to show for it. Useless, 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 useless. He really wished All Might was here. Just one punch. Izuku trembled as he was held tightly in the supervillain's grasp, staring past the literal hand on his face and into murderous red eyes. "Oh, is the baby hero gonna cry?" a villain mocked. But Izuku wasn't trembling because he was going to cry. All that training, a whole life of it, all the work All Might had put in, and it was his own fault, his inadequacy, that would cost him his life and waste one for all. He was shaking because he was drenched in feelings of self-worthlessness, of indignation, of fury. Yeah, he was pissed. Useless, useless. Just one punch. He was Deku, the useless hero, and he'd give everything he had until the end, including one last punch, like All Might would. Worthless. He trembled. Indignant. He glared. Furious. He yelled. Useless. He reared back his fist. One last punch. And he hit this supervillain with all that he had. It hit him square in the chest, a solid impact, and as soon as it did, the whole forest was filled with absolute, blinding green light arced with dangerous white. Like a lightning storm brought to life, but right next to them. Izuku could barely see through it himself. He could just make out a fragment of what was happening before light washed over his eyes again and left imprints that muddied his vision and added to the cacophony. And then the light slowly started to fade. Izuku blinked as fast as he could, rubbing his eyes furiously as he tried to clear his vision. When he looked up again, his heart nearly jumped out of his throat and his legs felt weak enough to give out on him. He fell onto his butt, and not at all gracefully, but his eyes were glued to the sky above him. Because where forests just were, was a big clearing. One where anyone and everything besides Izuku had been tossed up hundreds of feet in the air. Dirt, rocks, trees. Even the villains, who were left screaming as they free-floated. Some of them had even been knocked out, including, Izuku noticed, the villain who was covered in the same black fog that had warped him earlier. But what was amazing was that the cleared-out area, which was 10 meters long and 5 meters across at the end, narrowed down in an upside-down triangle shape until it got to Izuku. Almost as if he'd directed one for all through his punch, and the force spread out in that direction. And what was more amazing, the rest of the forest hadn't even been touched. It had been a controlled blast. In his shock, Izuku barely had the sense to reach inwards and search for that feeling. And, yup, it was right there. The smallest bit of glowing power of OFA was still thrumming pleasantly in his chest before it also retreated to the recesses of his quirk. He gaped at the realization. Izuku had just successfully used one for all. Chapter 13. Midoriya, Izuku getting parented. The blast had, thankfully, caught the teacher's attention. Because Izuku would have been screwed otherwise, lying on the forest floor with claw marks and a bullet wound, which sucked an awful lot more now that the adrenaline had worn off. And, unfortunately, he'd left his phone in the locker rooms so it wouldn't get busted. Noted, get a stronger phone and never leave it behind ever. So his pockets were empty of useful things like a connection to civilization, but at least he had a half-crushed Twix bar in there. Which is how the heroes found him, lying on the ground in a suddenly misplaced forest, with villains screaming obscenities at him from where they floated among said misplaced forest, nursing a gunshot wound, and eating a Twix bar. "Hey," he said lazily, reaching up a tired hand to give them a small wave. "Midoriya, what happened?" All Might cried as he bounded over to him in his hero form. Izuku pointed up, villain attack. "Supposed to be at the USJ. But I moved said USJ. Stumbled on them. Used the quirk thingy somehow. Now they're floating," he surmised. "Uh-huh. So it was you," Cementos cried. Izuku froze. Oh nuts. He was just about to muster the last dregs of his adrenaline and book it through the forest again. Terrible injuries be damned. Only for Vlad King to deck Cementos on the back of the head. Surprisingly hard for a body like a cinder block and, from the Foundation repairman's, sorry, hero's, face, painful too. "Not now," Vlad hissed. "Thank you, Vlad. If he didn't bleed out here, he'd have to send him a gift basket for stopping Cementos from wringing his neck." Izuku relaxed some before he remembered what he was doing. "Oh, and I got shot," Izuku added. Then, after some thought, "probably got rabies from that one mole man, too. Sorry, Mr. Principal, no offense. I'm very aware animal men and men animals can be perfectly civil and hygienic." The stoat, who was riding on top of Present Mick's head and nestled in his large volume of blonde hair, just waved him off with a paw. "That's okay. No offense was taken." But he should write an essay on quirked animal rights in English, just in case, right? Mike asked, looking weirdly hopeful. "No," Nedzu cut in. "No, he should not. And may I remind you, Present Mike, that Mr. Midoriya does not have English class with you until next semester." The voice hero slumped, looking devastated. "What even?" Izuku wondered if they still remembered he was there. "Okay, I'm probably hallucinating. You should all get those villains down and captured. They've got a teleporter and a crazy disintegration guy. And a gun girl, and needle hair girl. Mole dude. Oh, wait, I already mentioned him. Whatever, you'll figure it out. I'm blacking out now." All Might started fretting over him, looking like a worried mother. Meanwhile, Nedzu was giving out orders. "Someone please contact 13 right away. We'll need her to get these villains down." Izuku stayed awake just long enough to see an ectoplasm clone leading over 13 a few minutes later, the whole class of 1A in tow, and then the villains being brought down with the power of Black Hole, before he let his head fall back onto the ground below. Or was that All Might's hand cushioning his head? Then he promptly passed out. 0. Later that day, Izuku woke up in the UA Med Bay with his mother crying by his side while All Might, in his big form, tried to offer comfort and reassurances that he'd be safe from now on. For some reason, Izuku got the inexplicable urge to snort at that. But no, it couldn't be anything. Like All Might had said, this was a one-off, he'd be safe from now on. But once they both realized he was awake, they stopped fretting, and All Might pulled himself together long enough to excuse himself so Izuku could have privacy with his mother. She called his father over video chat as soon as they were alone. He answered immediately. Izuku, I heard something happened at school. His dad said, worry thick in his voice. Your mother told me it was an attack of some kind. Izuku frowned as he tried to think, although his brain was sluggish from the medicine he'd had to take. Yeah, it sucked. A gasp from his mother that sent a flinch through his body. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, but I fucked them up. Another gasp, one that had Izuku breaking out in a cold sweat. That was when he realized what he'd done. He'd just messed up. He did the bad thing. Were the painkillers recovery girl forced in him for making him crazy? How could he do the bad thing? Midoriya Izuku, I am devastated that you were hurt, but did you just curse in front of mommy? Inko asked. Oh no. Oh no. Not the tears. He hated the hears. Izuku, she whimpered. Even his dad was cowering, and he was 6,000 miles away with an ocean in between him and his wife's tears. Mom, he tried. His mother just bawled harder. Why, you're too young to fight villains. And you're definitely too young to curse. You can't keep growing up like this. You're still my baby boy. Then the waterworks were really flowing and Izuku was internally panicking. Not the tears. Never the tears. He did cursing. In front of Mom. That's the bad thing. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'll never get in a villain fight again. I'll put on the Mighty Man cartoons like we used to. I'll even go through the photo albums with you. He cried, waving his hands frantically and desperately, trying to stop his own tears at the same time. Ainko, dear, love, sweetie, please calm down. Zuka didn't mean it. He's still our kid, just a little grown up. It's gonna be okay. When that didn't stop her crying, he caved like a wet paper tissue. I'll leave at work as soon as possible and come to Japan. It'll be just like old times, Oh, Izuku was trained. He was trained bad. And Hisashi too. Because Midoriya Izuku did not just pick up a psychology book one day and go from there when training Kaken. No, he learned operant conditioning from the master of it, his mother. Midoriya Inko, a woman who had absolutely zero idea just how powerful her tears were. Like the world's greatest rolled-up newspaper to bonk Izuku and Hisashi on the nose with. They were so trained. 20 minutes later, and Inko had calmed down enough to reassure Hisashi that he didn't need to get on the first flight to Japan and that she was totally, definitely fine with Izuku cursing. She understood that he was a young man now. There's no way that was the truth, even if Inko hadn't caught on to her own self-told lies quite yet. His mom had, and always would, look at Izuku like he was her little baby, no matter how old he got. Izuku couldn't even be mad about it. It was nice to be loved. To have her be so protective and always willing to coddle him, even as she let him go and live his dream as a hero. But for several more hours, the family just enjoyed each other's company and made sure he was comfortable and all right. His mom had even brought his all-night comforter from home to smother him in. It was, all things considered, a very cozy afternoon. After his dad had to hang up to start his shift at work and his mom went home to rest, Recovery Girl had turned off the lights around his cot and made him go to sleep. It was still early, just barely 6 in the afternoon. But Izuku was out like a light all the same. When he woke up is when things got interesting. Shortly after, Recovery Girl had opened the curtain to let in Yagi, in his small form, before giving Izuku a once-over. Only when she nodded, apparently satisfied by what she saw, did she step back and close the curtain behind her, allowing them some time to talk. The man was shockingly quiet as he yelled, I am here. With hot cocoa. Izuku took care of his injuries as he forced himself into a sitting position and took the mug. Thanks, Yagi. It is no problem, he said as he sat on a chair beside Izuku's bed, holding his own mug in hand. Then, he noticed the comforter. Sort of hard to miss with it being bright yellow, blue, and red, covered in stars, and with his face staring back up at him with a blinding smile. Whoa-ho! Fanboy ahoy! Izuku scoffed but smiled all the same, like you're one to talk. They quietly chuckled together, but soon their laughs died out. Izuku's smile fell as he thought about the events of the day. So, Izuku started. I guess you want to ask about One for All, huh? But, to his surprise, Yagi shook his head. Actually, I came here to ask if you were all right. What happened was something that never should have occurred, least of all while I was teaching at this very school. If you have any concerns or need anything, could you find it in yourself to place your trust in me once again, just for a bit, to let me help you?" Izuku frowned. Aol Mig. Yagi, I didn't stop trusting you even for a bit. Well. He looked away then, staring into the rich chocolate that swirled around in his mug. It's kinda embarrassing, but thinking of you was how I was able to send them all blasting into the sky. Yagi tilted his head at that. My boy, nothing that you've just experienced is embarrassing. But if you're okay with it, could you tell me what you mean by that? He asked softly. Izuku did his best to focus on the feeling of warmth radiating from his mug, soothing his hands, and not the warmth burning his cheeks and ears. I just got it in my head that if you were there, you'd be able to solve it all with one punch. So, I wanted to at least do that too. One last punch, I mean, even if it ended up being useless. So that's what I did, and then, next thing I know, the whole forest is lit up with green electricity, and everyone and everything that was in the direction of my punch was floating up in the air. When Izuku wouldn't meet his eyes again, All Might reached over and rubbed comforting circles on Izuku's back. I am glad that you pulled through, that I could inspire you in that way, and most of all, I am just glad that you are safe. I am so proud of you, Midoriya. But I also think that after this, you should seriously see a therapist about your perceptions of being useless. Have you heard of this guy called Hound Dog? Works here, provides counseling for free, looks like a big dog. Ring any bells? He said, a lightness in his voice that wasn't there before. Izuku snorted at the obvious attempt to cheer him up. Have you heard of this lady, recovery girl? Works here, provides medical services to staff for free, especially for those with missing organs. Looks like a tiny old lady with a syringe cane. Ring any bells? Can't miss her. All Might chuckled, low and fond instead of his usual boisterous laughter that filled a room. All right, Squirt, I get it. Settle down. Chapter 14. How to Make Friends by Midoriya Izuku. Step 1. Beat up a giant robot or a villain. Step 2. Step 3. Profit. Midoriya got a lot of visits from his classmates while he was stuck in the infirmary, which cheered him up a lot. But it was when he was cleared to go back to classes that the fun really started off. Everyone had been buzzing with barely hidden excitement the whole morning, but no one had told Izuku why. Were they doing a cool exercise in heroics class? Izuku didn't get his answer until lunchtime that day. The whole class was going down one hall together, in a different direction from the cafeteria. Uraraka had grabbed his hand and led him that way while Ida had, interestingly enough, taken to joining her efforts. No offense, Ida, but don't you kinda sorta hate me? Izuku asked. The blue-haired boy sputtered. No, I'm sorry, Midoriya, he said, bowing. It's my fault that I gave you that impression. I thought you didn't have the spirit or discipline to become a hero. Ouch. But I was wrong. After seeing the forest you took down, or rather up, the teachers explained that your quirk had experienced a power-up shortly before term started and that you didn't have control over it yet. Izuku nodded along to the, mostly true, cover-up. To realize that you had held back in your fight against the villains not just for our safety at the USJ, but for theirs? I understand now that I greatly underestimated you. Izuku blushed hard. Thank you. But it was nothing really. Anyone in the hero course would do it. Uraraka beamed. See? I told you he was just an adorable ball of nerves. Is that a compliment? He asked. Ida tilted his head. I'm not sure either. But, in any case, I would like the chance to start over if that is all right with you. He looked sincere. And well, who was Izuku to say no to new friends? Sure. Ida smiled, standing a little straighter. He adjusted his glasses and then rigidly bowed again. It is good to meet you, then. A wide smile made its way onto his face. Good to meet you too, Ida-kun. A pop of explosions distracted the three from their little moment. Bakugo was striding from behind him, a scowl on his face. Well, hurry up, or you're gonna miss the whole damn thing. He grumbled at them as he passed. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows. What thing? Uraraka practically jumped. Right, let's go. As Izuku had found out in recent days, the bubbly girl was far stronger than she looked. and he was helpless as she dragged him down the hall. Ida was no help. In fact, he rushed ahead to open a door for him. Izuku was more or less pulled into an empty meeting room and met with a roar of noise. Surprise! He was shocked as he looked around to find all of Class 1A in the room, facing him with smiles on their faces. A few were even clapping, and were those kazoos? So shocked. In fact, a few people ended up mysteriously tripping. Whoops! When he finally got his quirk under control, Izuku got his dropped jaw to start working and actually form words. What's going on? Uraraka somehow got even brighter. We wanted to welcome you back to class. So we got the teachers to lend us this room for a small party. Yaoyorozu came forwards then, her hands clasped in excitement. We have crispy carriage, takoyaki, and cupcakes made by Lunch Rush. We even have a banner set up. Izuku's eyes drifted up then to the big green banner draped across the opposite wall. He slowly read the white writing painted on. Good job at kicking names and taking ass. Yaoyorozu and the rest of the class whirled around to face the banner in surprise. It got a few snickers. Even Uraraka was giggling, and Ito was left sputtering vague admonitions. Huh, what idiot wrote that? Kaminari laughed. Damn it, Kaminari, you wrote that, Jiru said as she smacked him upside the head. Ow, I did. Oh yeah, I did. It was an accident, I promise. The blonde boy cried, ducking and covering his head from any more blows. Izuku discreetly untied Kaken's shoelaces. Huh, he really thought it would have been him. Well then, aside from that unfortunate mess up, everything else is in order. Now then, who wants food? Yaoyorozu spoke up. Uraraka pushed him forwards. I elect the birthday boy. I mean, the not dead from villains boy. Unfortunately, she'd also touched him with all her fingers, and Izuku was suddenly floating towards the ceiling. He looked up, paled, then started flailing. That looked like metal, going at full speed. Uraraka, he shouted. Uraraka. The fan. The fan. Uraraka the fan. He cried, his screams embarrassingly high-pitched. Hee whoops, she said sheepishly before tapping her fingers together. Izuku fell out of the air and right into Shoji's arms. He looked up nervously into the impassive and frankly intimidating boy's face. Haha, sorry I shook you like a Lego piece. He was promptly dropped to the floor and landed with a not at all graceful thump. Oof, he huffed before sitting up and cradling his head. Sue, thankfully, helped him up. Don't you have telekinesis? Couldn't you have just pushed yourself out of the way? Karo. Wait, could he? Izuku froze before his face slowly turned into one of awe. Oh my god, you're right. Uraraka, do it again. I want to see if I can fly using your quirk. She got an excited shine in her eyes. Ooh, sure. Then make me fly. He bounded up and she jogged closer. They were just about to touch again when a wall of ice came between them. Izuku and everyone else looked over, shocked. Todoroki just shrugged, grabbing an All Might-themed cupcake and starting to take off the wrapper. What? You all were taking too long. I was hungry. Oh man, not cool. Quirk blocker. Kaminari huffed before Jiru elbowed him in the stomach. 0. After the party, classes got to resume like normal. And, with heroics classes, came support work, which was why half of Class 1A were standing excitedly outside of the support course's classrooms, waiting to see what upgrades they would be getting. Hell yeah, I got these awesome gauntlets. Sweet, I got a new light-bending cloth so I can finally make my outfit, Hagakure exclaimed. Wait, then were you not wearing an outfit, Bifo? Izuku sighed as he took out his weapon of choice and spritzed water on the boy. Hey, what the heck? Bad Mineta, Izuku said before pocketing his spray bottle. Midoriya, Izuku. He heard Power Loader call from the classroom entrance. Izuku perked up and then practically skipped forwards and into the classroom. He rubbed his hands together in anticipation. All right, I'm excited to see what you've got for me, Mr. Power Loader. Air cannon boots, a laser gun, smoke screen bombs, headgear with 360 camera views, he said, stars practically shining in his eyes. Power Loader turned around, grabbed something off a nearby table before turning back to Izuku and handing him a small cardboard box. Here. Izuku blinked once, then twice as he looked at the mundane contents of the box. What's this? Zip ties. They're lightweight and good for capture work. Oh, and some carved granite to match your normal ounce requirement. Was he serious? These are literal rocks. Izuku intelligently pointed out. I've been told you have a thing for tripping people with them. But everyone else got cool things like electrical discharge directors for Kaminari or he used camouflage suit. Izuku said, throwing his arms around in a vague imitation of both of them. You know, pew-pew things and awesome infiltration things. Power Loader shrugged. I mean, we made you a belt to carry your stuff, too? The teacher held out the belt, then. It was red, but painfully average-looking. Izuku shoved his face into his hands and groaned. Do you not want it? Was he crying? Yes, he was. It was in his jeans, okay? But if anyone asked, that was sweat in his eyes. And no, I want it, he quietly said, reaching out one hand in a grabby motion while he kept his face buried in the other. He felt the weight of the belt in his hands. As soon as he did, Izuku turned around and fled out the room. He heard the calls of his classmates behind him, but he did his best to hide away in a broom closet and sink into the floor and out of existence. Damn, he was so lame. He wanted a laser gun. 0. Eventually, he was found and dragged out of the closet into his heroics class. So, All Might said loudly, hands on his hips. I hear it was support day. What did you all get? I got a thermal regulator. I got stereo boots. I got a rock. I got electrical amplifiers. I got grenades. I got a rock. 0. Halfway across Japan, a very evil overlord sat in a dark, equally evil-looking room. Well, it's a shame Tamura and Kurojiri were captured, but no matter, the breakout should be happening any moment now. He can try again, then. Surely, it'll work out the second time. What harm could a little green bean hero student do? 0. All the way back across Japan, Midoriya Izuku sneezed. Chapter 15. Who were they again? The Legion of the Villains? Vengeance? Venom? Viagra? Chapter text. Aizawa stared out at the class in a way that would have cowed the most dangerous of criminals in Tartarus. Izuku, however, seemed mostly unfazed. He just kept smiling, lightly kicking his feet back and forth under his desk and braiding together his zip ties in an increasingly long chain. For how devastated he had first been at his support gear, the boy had quickly bounced back. Somehow, the chain had wrapped itself securely around no less than 6 students. Midoriya, should I even ask what you're doing? He deadpanned. Izuku stopped his humming for a brief moment to happily say, no. All right then. Aizawa took another chug of his coffee. Despite the recent villain attack, the sports festival is still going to happen like normal. Thankfully on time, as the stadium just had repairs finished after it was suddenly relocated. Midoriya didn't even have the decency to look more than a little sheepish. Then Aizawa smiled deviously. So, we'll be doing morning exercises every day from here on out until then. Meet me out at the fields in 7 minutes. Anyone who's late will be enrolled in remedial classes. That got a reaction out of the class. All of them stood up at once and started towards the door, only for several students to stumble as the chain of zip ties locked around their ankles or wrists dragged them back. Ojiro had, unfortunately, had his tail wrapped in the things and nearly face-planted. Katsuki, who did face-plant, sobbed into the floor. Fuck you, Deku. Huh, Aizawa said between sips of coffee. It was 8 students. Then he stalked out of the chaotic class without a backwards glance. Yes, this was a good plan. Midoriya would surely be in trouble with his classmates now. He may have experienced a villain attack, but joke's on him. Aizawa didn't have a heart. Pity would get him nowhere. And really, the boy needed to have his antics reined in. 0. Meanwhile, the mood in the classroom absolutely did not meet their teacher's expectations as Izuku stood on his desk, nearly dragging up half a dozen other students with him via zip ties, and yelled, "Who here wants to fly?" That set off a round of cheers. 0. 7 minutes later, and the whole class was floating out of a UA window, zip-tied and all. Aizawa nearly spit out his coffee as he realized that somehow, It was now 13 students roped up in a conga line. Why did Midoriya add more? Why did they let him? He really did start hacking up his drink when Yaoyorozu said something to Todoroki, who nodded before forming an ice slide for them to get to the ground. Those were the two students he'd been counting on being well-behaved. Midoriya looked fucking chipper as he waved at Aizawa. Hi, Sensei. We made it on time. Sensei threw up his hands, styrofoam coffee cup flying up in the air with abandon. I can't win against you. Izuku helpfully drifted the, thankfully mostly empty and lightweight, cup back into his teacher's hands. No one can, he said kindly. Aizawa took in several deep breaths, gaining his renowned composure again, and then nodded to the track behind him. 10 laps, all of you. They started moving towards the track as one group, almost like they were taking it as a personal challenge to stay in step with one another. Aizawa groaned and started massaging his oncoming headache. For some inexplicable reason, he had the urge to yell out some expletives followed by the word Deku and take off the zip ties. He turned around to shout towards them. Quietly, to himself, he mourned his loss of pride once Vlad saw his kids at the sports festival. They're gonna make fools of themselves. They're gonna make fools of me. Across the field, the students were talking to each other excitedly and hyping each other up. Izuku grinned. Man, we are gonna do amazing at the sports festival. 0. Izuku was blissfully ignorant of the despair his homeroom teacher was feeling. Similar to how he was ignoring the heart condition, he was no doubt giving Cementos. However, two teachers that he did pay attention to more or less were All Might and Gran Torino. And after school, they were having another training session in the reinforced warehouse bunker. So, you somehow used a punch to contain the effects of One for All. Gran Torino said, try it again. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Sure, but I don't know if it'll just work like that. I've punched stuff before during heroics class, and that's never happened. Midoriya, you told me that you felt a certain way before using One for All. Maybe try replicating that. All Might suggested. He shrugged. Well, I was angry. I felt kinda useless. Like I wished I could solve it all with a punch. Then I did, so I'm not sure if I could get that same feeling back. Torino looked at him consideringly. You solved the problem, so you have nothing to make you feel those feelings again? Is that right? All Might suddenly looked worried. Gran, don't. Izuku looked between the two, confused. What was up? So, say, if that problem were back, how would it make you feel? Pissed and useless again. Oh my god, please Gran, I just got him to read those therapy pamphlets from Hound Dog. Yagi begged, hands together and everything. Yeah, Izuku didn't like where this was going. Even less so when Gran pulled out his phone and started typing. He pulled up a news website and walked up to Izuku, shoving the article in his face. Legion of the Villains. Izuku read, they got the name wrong. At some point, some random villain had mentioned it. Wasn't it more something along the lines of Legends of Villainy? Gran just waved him off. They kinda sucked at their job. The media doesn't care much since they got their asses handed to them by a first year. What? No one cares. I got shot. Izuku protested. All Might patted him comfortingly on the shoulder. Gran had no such kindness to offer. Sorry kid, but heroes are literally paid to get shot. You and your classmates will be sent on internships soon and in the real line of fire. It's pretty much a rite of passage for a student to get their first bullet wound. I remember my first bullet wound. All Might reminisced. It happened in Tijuana, actually. Gran nodded sagely. I remember that. I had to bail you out of prison. David was so excited to use his car's rockets to fly over Border Patrol. What even happened in Tijuana? Izuku cried for probably the 20th time. He was ignored. It doesn't matter. Gran dismissed him. Now get back to reading that article, twerp. Izuku reeled back. Shishoke. The leader and a key member of the Legion of the Villains, the ones responsible for the failed attack on Yue a week earlier, broke out of jail earlier this morning. Izuku's green curls flew rapidly as his head shot up, and he set his gaze on Torino. They're out. Oh hell, that was bad. Yagi frowned and gestured to Izuku. See what you've done, Gran? You've traumatized him. Just keep scrolling. Gran ordered. Izuku did as ordered. The Legion's leader left this message on his cell wall. I'm sorry, hold up. Is that in blood? Yes. Now read the message. Izuku gulped. The dark, flaking red on the gray cell walls didn't look quite as fun as a Hallmark greeting card. I, Shigaraki Tamura, declare war on the secret boss. I will one-shot him. Complete and utter oblivion awaits. There will be nothing left of his body. Ha 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 ha. Yeesh. All Might cringed back. He literally wrote an evil laugh on the wall. Hold up, there's more. Izuku said, ha 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 ha. Huh. So, you feel pissed and useless and fearing for your life yet? Gran asked. Meh. It was decidedly less scary all of a sudden. The villain could probably kick his ass if given another chance, but at least Izuku could call him a dweeb before he went out. Izuku shrugged. You should have stopped me at the breakout. The message kind of killed it. Aw damn. Chapter 16. The solution is to always punch harder. Remember, violence solves everything. After Gran's unsuccessful attempts to send Izuku into emotional turmoil, all three had to admit that they needed to seek help, which was leading up to one specific phone call that Izuku was dreading. Do we have to? Izuku groaned for probably the nth time. Yes, it is of utmost importance that you get control of One for All as soon as possible, All Might said, gung-ho as he started typing in the numbers. It's just he's so-so. He trailed off as he tried to find the right words. Arrogant, pushy, a little judgmental jerk, Gran helpfully suggested. Izuku snapped his fingers, nodding along. Yeah, that. But Gran kept going. Gotta stick up his ass? Know-it-all? In need of comedy lessons from Ms. Joke? Which, by the way, I gave him a coupon for that he still hasn't cashed in, the twerp. A click of the phone. Mirai, I'm glad you answered. Yagi loudly shouted as he sent a look towards them, waving his hand through the air in a frantic, cut-it-out motion. Gran looked ready to go on, just to spite Yagi and Sasaki, before they heard Naitai's voice on the other side of the line. Let me in the warehouse. Never mind. I found the keys under the potted plant. Wait, why are you here already? Yagi asked. I haven't even told you what we need. There was a distinctly unimpressed silence on the other end. Oh, right. Future stuff. Naitai huffed out a small laugh. Future stuff. He answered. Then the phone clicked. He'd hung up. Gran sniffed, crossing his arms and looking away. I'd say he could go get biblical with a cactus, but I bet he'd end up being the bigger prick of the two. Gran, Yagi said, scandalized, he's not that bad. You're right. He's not that bad. Gran said to both Yagi and Izuku's surprise. At least he had the sense to tell you to retire years ago. But that doesn't change the fact that he's a whiny, controlling. The door to the underground bunker slammed open, with said green-haired man stepping through. Narcissistic, self-righteous, high-horse bastard. Naitai completed. Exactly, Gran said before realizing who answered him. Then he shrugged and kept nodding along, unrepentant. Took the words right out of my mouth. At least I am not so foolish as to use a villain organization's death threats to scare a child into using the most powerful quirk in Japan. Izuku almost snorted, as if Sasaki wouldn't have done the same if he thought it'd help. That man was a terror that could be worse than Gran Torino at times. Ah yes, because you're such a genius. Just like you were a genius when you messed up my taiyaki order. Gran pointed at Naitai accusingly. The former sidekick looked down at Gran, unimpressed. Is this what this is about? That was 12 years ago, Torino. Gran, who was absolutely not perturbed by the hero who towered at twice his height, shook his fist menacingly. It was on purpose, and you know it. That was on accident, but, hypothetically, if it were on purpose it would be very mild revenge for when you threw me off a building 12 years, 3 months, and 7 days ago. Izuku gaped. Well, that escalated quickly. I am sorry, did he just say he was thrown off a building? His words were suddenly muffled as All Might put his hand over his mouth. Shoo, just back away slowly. Don't make any noise, or else they'll go after you too. They can smell fear. Izuku wisely followed his mentor's advice. They looked for all the world like they were trying to hide from raptors. But, well, a battle between a senior citizen and a know-it-all was basically just that. Izuku and Yagi did their best to disappear into the walls as the two started going at it. 15 minutes later, Naitai's clothes and hair looked disheveled, his glasses tilted off his face. The normally put-together hero was slouched as he held a bag of peas from the corner store to his face. Gran was lying flat on his back, not because he'd gotten his ass handed to him, but because the elderly man had gotten tired after trying to beat the younger hero up. He had elected to take a 5-minute power nap and just never bothered to get up again. A bruise was forming across his face from the lucky hit Sir had gotten in, but Midoriya and Yagi had politely and fearfully decided not to comment on it. Clearly, whatever rivalry those two had going on was a long time coming and was absolutely not their problem. Yagi and Midoriya looked at each other, whispered as they tossed a coin, of which Yagi lost, and then All Might grumbled as Izuku lightly pushed him forwards to deal with it. Right, now that has been settled, Yagi started, admirably doing his best to not stare at the ice pack on Naitai's jaw and the bandage on Gran's bruising nose. Can someone please tell me what's going on with my successor? Naitai looked over sullenly before answering. I talked with S.H.I.E.L.D. after hearing about what happened at the former location of the USJ. Which, I have to admit, the sudden and accidental move worked out for the better. Your inability to control your quirk and your streak of massive property damage saved lives, Midoriya. Thanks. He continued on, but what S.H.I.E.L.D. and I came up with was that effectively controlling. Floaty McFloat face combined with one for all has two seemingly conflicting factors: control and power. Your original quirk required absolute precision to be used as effectively as possible. You've spent your entire life focusing on every detail, which is why you had trouble moving anything large or with more than a dozen components. Izuku thought back to the orange chicken incident. I bypassed that by unfocusing my sixth sense, but I caused too much damage. I couldn't figure out how to keep the power level down. That's the trade-off, a bigger range, but since I can't focus, there's no control. He pointed out. Naitai pushed up his glasses, making it glint harshly in the light. It would have made him look distinguished and impressive if they weren't crooked. You need to unfocus to move more objects, but you also need a way to control how much power and direction goes into your quirk. That's the dilemma. Mentally unfocus and you gain power and range, but lose control. Mentally focus and it's the opposite. As far as we knew, until the Liaison of Vengeance. Legion of Villains. Yagi corrected. No, I'm pretty sure it was Legends of Villainy. Izuku muttered in thought. Night-Eye glared at them, shutting them both up. Until the Lav's attack, we didn't exactly know how to find a balance between these two demands. That's where the punch came in. He continued. In that moment where you were up against the League, you were panicked and briefly dropped your detailed concentration, allowing for a greater affected area of telekinesis, but one that would have been completely uncontrolled. If that were all, you would have had similar results to when you first learned to unfocus your quirk. Izuku grimaced as he imagined what had happened to the chicken. Applied to a human being, and that was a whole nother ballpark of that even he didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. But that wasn't all, Night-Eye said, pulling Izuku from his thoughts. You couldn't mentally control the force of your quirk once you lost focus, but your punch became a way to physically control it instead. The boy's eyes widened in realization. In summary, S.H.I.E.L.D. and I theorized that my body became the medium for direction and strength when my mind couldn't. He finished in awe. The direction I hit is the only place affected by my telekinesis, and how hard I hit is how strong the telekinesis becomes. Perhaps Night-Eye was tired after his bout with Gran and unwilling to bother putting up a facade. Izuku swore he could almost make out approval on that normally stoic face. Yes, that exactly. The only issue now is practice. The more you work on this technique, the more natural it'll become. Not to mention, you're going to need to get used to the effects of Quirk Backlash. Quirk Backlash? Yagi asked, beating him to it. I've never had Backlash. Izuku muttered. Normally quirks were limited in two ways. Weak quirks like his had hard limits, like his ounce requirement. He could use his quirk all day long, but never exceed 15 ounces. Stronger quirks like Todoroki's or Uraraka's had Backlash, like becoming too cold or becoming nauseous. Night-Eye nodded. Did you know that you didn't just pass out from your injuries in shock? You passed out from mental quirk exhaustion. And that's not all. Chio had to fix some minor muscle tears in the arm you used to hit the league with. Izuka blinked. He had, admittedly, been dodging Recovery Girl's lecture. He wouldn't ignore it, but he would absolutely dodge his responsibilities for a few days, or his name wasn't Midoriya Izuku. Then he realized something. No, I did not know that. How do you know that? He asked. I hacked into UA's medical files. The pro hero said simply. Wow, that sounds super illegal. Izuka said, but otherwise didn't comment. He was busy thinking about these new revelations. I have to work on my quirk so I can stand the mental and physical strain. Izuka summarized. Night I nodded. But I've basically got the technique figured out. Hypothetically. Night I nodded. Here, he put his hands together as his face stretched into a Cheshire-like grin. Beside him, Yagi started sweating. Gran was glad he hadn't gotten up off the floor as he felt his knees go weak at the thought of future paperwork that'd inevitably get shoved onto him. Across town, both Bakugu and Cementos felt shivers inexplicably go down their spines. Nedzu began cackling, although it wasn't so inexplicable for him as he'd long since bugged Midoriya's training room and was watching everything with glee at the thought of the interesting chaos that the boy would cause. For some reason, Izuku was tempted to look at his phone and watch the live footage from where he'd also bugged the principal's office back, but that was neither here nor there. It was also undoubtedly of questionable legality, but, as Izuku had learned from many mentions of Tijuana and certain people getting thrown off of certain roofs, all his role models were fantastic at breaking the law. So what you're saying, he began slowly, is that now that I've got it mostly figured out, I have absolute free reign to use my quirk during the sports festival. Night I nodded. Including but not limited to defying the event rules, changing the arena obstacles, and maybe possibly commandeering several pieces of heavy equipment for personal use. Just as examples, of course. Night I nodded, then stopped. Wait, no. Too late. Izuku said with a grin. Chapter 17. If you first succeed, try again just because you can. The day of the sports festival was coming up, and Izuku spent the time in between practicing his quirk and gleefully writing down all his ideas for it in a notebook. The manic muttering and pages floating around him, followed by strings of red yarn going between his ideas, was enough to ward off most of his classmates from getting too close. Except for Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki. Uraraka because it was in her nature to go through life with a smile on her face, even at its oddest. Ida because the boy was busy trying to rearrange the red strings and pages in an orderly flotation manner. And Todoroki because Izuku stopped his mad scribbling to look up at the boy by his desk. Hey, Todoroki, why are you here? Todoroki shrugged as he started adding more red yarn to the floating tangle, along with a few pages of his own notes. Although, Izuku squinted. On a closer look, his ideas seemed to start with sports festival tactics before wildly veering into other topics. Somehow, he'd connected the sports festival with newspaper clippings about the moon landing. My father considers my theories inane and in need of intervention by psychology specialists. The boy answered, scoffing. They're lizards, all of them. Midoriya trailed off. But that doesn't explain why you're here. Being seen with you, the only person I've found worse than me, will anger my father. I think that anger will be enough to reboot the nano chip in his brain. He couldn't tell if his classmate was serious or not. Looking to his two other friends, he saw them too busy to weigh in. Ida was concentrated on organizing the printed-out forums about how some brothers from 200 years ago tied into a natural disaster from 5 years ago. Seriously, what even? Meanwhile, Uraraka was busy using some highlighters to go over the parts of the sports festival plans she wanted in on. Whatever the case, Izuku didn't have to address that as Kaminari, the person being their lookout for the day, popped his head in and shouted, Guys, Aizawa-sensei's coming. Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki scattered to their seats while Izuku quickly opened the window and sent the floating tangle of plans and theories up to the roof. Shutting it, he turned back to the front just as their homeroom teacher walked in. On top of the roof, a rodent principal stood expectantly as the papers floated up. He knew everything that happened in his school, after all, and he'd be a fool to miss out on this. He looked over the project his students had been working on. Chuckling, he took out a few pieces of paper and string and tied on his own thoughts. Encouraging the youth was important these days, after all. Then he turned around and stepped back towards the rooftop access, many thoughts already swirling through his mind on how to challenge his students as well. One couldn't just give advice after all. Adversity was needed too. 0. The day of the sports festival was soon upon them, and Midoriya, as the highest scorer on the entrance exam, would be the one to deliver the opening speech for his year. He stepped out into the middle of the arena with his class and noticed with a grin that there was a huge part of the stadium with hundreds of colored papers held over their heads, arranged so they spelled out a message. "Fuck you, DKU." Katsuki nudged him as he looked over at the scene himself. Looks like all of Aldera came to show their support. The rest of his classmates were gaping, but neither boy was fazed. Izuku had gotten a similar show of support during his first middle school sports festival when his old elementary school teachers and underclassmen had shown up. Although the homemade signs held less cursing and more glitter glue back then. Izuku smiled as the crowd of his former school rippled and the message changed. "Fuck them up, DKU." Ah, yes, they must be excited to see literally anyone else get screwed over but them. How sweet of them. Taking all of this in stride, Izuku marched up to the podium where he'd be giving his speech. He took a deep breath, leaned into the microphone, and gave his signature bright, slightly feral smile. "Hello, everybody." A cheer rang out through the crowd at that alone. He thrust out a hand and gestured to where Aldera sat. "And hello to my former school. Thanks for showing up, gang." A rowdy set of applause and yelling came from that side of the stadium. The rest of the stadium watched confused before hesitantly clapping too. Understandable considering the signs full of expletives. "Now I know you're all excited to see who wins and what shenanigans will happen today. Keep in mind, betting on hero fights is illegal in Japan." He grinned wider. "But the three-shop system is not. So let's all play, get prizes, and cash out responsibly, am I right?" He said with a wink. The slow clapping from the rest of the stadium died down as people looked between themselves, wondering if the top student in the most prestigious hero school was really promoting pachinko-style gambling on national television. In contrast, Aldera just roared louder. "I don't believe that's legal," Ida said from the crowd of students. Bakugo turned from where he was placing his own bets on his phone. He closed the private forum Aldera was on, then pocketed it before their class president could see. He hit Ida upside the head as he barked out a laugh. "Probably not. Don't worry too much, glasses." "Now then," Izuku said as he finished tapping out his own bets beneath the podium. "Let's all play fair, or not, depends on how you fight. And remember, plus ultra." He raised a fist in the air. Ending on that strong note, the crowd clapped somewhat unsurely as Midoriya hopped off the stage and joined his classmates. Todoroki came up to him and handed him a 10,000 yen note. "Put that on Bakugo, finishing second," he said. Izuku's eyebrows raised, but he took it. "This is a lot, Todoroki." He didn't miss a beat. "It's my father's money." Izuku elected to skip over that particular tidbit. Why bet on who finishes in second and not first? You'll get first, but everyone's already guessing that. "Ooh, Kaken's going to hate that," Izuku said with a small chuckle. "Okay, Todoroki, 10,000 on Kaken." Todoroki nodded, satisfied, before he left, intercepting Ida, who looked a little cross. Uraraka came up beside him next. She bumped her hip against his and sent him a smile. "You ready to go above and beyond the competition?" He grinned back, although this time it was less mischievous and far more sunny. "Always." 0. Across the stadium, All Might was fretting as he looked at the crowd of Aldera's students, staff, and alumni who were holding up some rather interesting signs. He shook his head. This won't do. Luckily, he came prepared. Looking at the cardboard boxes at his feet, he opened one up to reveal dozens and dozens of rolled-up green t-shirts. In another, he pulled out an air cannon. Shoving a t-shirt in, he held up the cannon with a look of determination. Locked and loaded. 0. Back to the students. Midoriya was standing at the exit of the sports festival stadium. Or rather, He and Uraraka were standing towards the back of the crowd with the rest of 1A. Uraraka went around, tapping everyone and letting them float slightly, just an inch above the ground in preparation. Izuku, meanwhile, studied the map of events Jiru had drawn in the dirt after overhearing what some of the obstacles would be. Above them, the green lights turned off, one after the other. 3. Present Mike shouted. Izuku committed the obstacles to memory. 2. He turned to his classmates as the last were sent floating. No one even noticed as all the other students were facing away from them. 1. Go, go, go. He loosened his focus just enough to concentrate on his classmates like they were one entity. Then he punched upwards into the air with both arms, as if he were a modern-day Superman. In an instant, the entire class of 1A shot over the competition, bypassing the crowded tunnel entirely. Over the stadium they went, to the shocked and awed expressions of the crowd. Around him were shrieks of glee as they flew into the sunny sky, the wind whipping around them as they felt like they were on top of the world. Only after they cleared the stadium did they change course. With a smile, he gently lowered them down so they were only a few meters above the path, and they coasted over after that. The 0-pointers were the first obstacles they came across, which they just flew over in seconds, followed by a massive series of pits which they just flew over in seconds. Then mines which they— holy crap, were those aerial drones. Izuku let out a high-pitched scream as drones flew at them at high speeds. As they neared, hatches on their bottoms opened up and sent out missiles. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw the World War II-esque paint job on them. They were white with the feral laughing face of a cartoonish but familiar stoat. This wasn't part of the plan, Ashido called out, even as she sent out some acid to take out a row of small missiles. They exploded in a mostly harmless burst of color. Smoke bombs. Then, but not without some kick as Ashido was sent hurling back a few meters. Nedzu's bombing us. Izuku shouted incredulously before grinning. This is the best principal I've ever had. No principal had ever done something as crazy and fun. Midoriya continued flying his class even faster, but the drones were in hot pursuit. Fight as you go, he shouted back to them. Thanks to Class 1A having time to get used to Izuku's brand of anarchy, they barely batted an eye at the sudden barrage of missiles and quickly got to work. Izuku swept the air with a kick of his telekinesis, taking out a few drones. Beside him, Kakin was blowing up some more, getting covered in pink powder head to toe for it. Not that he cared. Uraraka sent him into orbit. Yaoyorozu had procured a bazooka at some point. Meanwhile, Ida had used his engines as jets to push Kaminari to the center of the drones, who then used his quirk to fry a whole swathe of them. Missiles should have been stressful, but they were having the time of their lives as they got to go all out with their quirks while flying. Sadly, all too soon, they found themselves nearing the end as they followed the path that looped back to the stadium. With the last of the smoke bomb missiles being destroyed in their wake, they arched over the stadium walls with a trail of brilliant color following behind them. Izuku and Uraraka joined hands as they flew in first. It was decided since it was their quirks making this possible, they'd be claiming the top rank together. Everybody else would follow. Present Mike was going wild as they soared over the edge of the stadium and touched down. And for the first time in history, first place and second place are perfect ties between 20 students. With Uraraka and Midoriya taking first place in an insane minute and 32 seconds, and the rest of Class 1A taking second in an outstanding minute and 33 seconds. Izuku doubled over, a little winded from all of that. But when he looked up, he broke out into a grin as he saw the stadium screen, which was playing and replaying Class 1A's landing, all perfectly touching the ground at the same time so that UA would have to grant them all the same placing. Around them, several students were waving to the crowd, and Aoyama was even bowing. Uraraka cheered, throwing her arms around Izuku for a second before grabbing his hand again and holding their clasped hands up in victory. He glanced over, still breathing hard from exhilaration but happy. You ready for a second go-around? The crowd was going absolutely nuts around them, and he almost didn't hear her answer. Yeah, let's go. 0. While it wasn't against the rules, it was already completely out of the norm for an entire class to work together. What no one expected, however, was that they'd all line back up at the exit where the race began to do the race all over again, this time on their own. The first was to show solidarity, planning, and caring about efficiency over individual flashiness. And, well, admittedly, everyone wanted to secure a spot in the second round. Hey, they weren't prideful enough to pretend they weren't worried that they'd lose their spot in the hero course if they weren't good enough. This guaranteed them safety on a technicality. It was also memorable, and Midnight Sensei would no doubt be overjoyed that they were taking her publicity stunt lessons to heart. But the second round was meant to display their individual talents. The sports festival was meant to be their opportunity to show off to potential agencies so they could get internship offers, after all. And, well, with only a minute and a half taken up considering how fast Izuku and Uraraka cheesed the system, Class 1A had plenty of time to shine. Through the speakers, Izuku heard Present Mix loud exclamations as he set off in a sprint before kicking against the ground, telekinetically forcing himself forward in a burst of power. It looks like they're restarting. Is that even in the rules? Aizawa-sensei sighed tiredly. No, because no one ever thought that a student would ever go back into the race, much less an entire class of students. Up in the announcer's box, Aizawa reached to an earpiece. I have just been informed that Principal Nedzu is assembling a team right now to rewrite the school charter. Wow, only a first year, and Midoriya is already getting rules made because of him. I can't tell if that's an accomplishment or not. Aizawa sounded rather dead inside. Oh no, this isn't the first rule made because of him. He's actually got a whole section called the Midoriya Clause. Izuku huffed a laugh as he powered up One for All and sent a 0-pointer flying into the tree line. Just one clause. Gosh, he really had to step up his game. 0. At the stadium, Yagi took a moment to laugh boisterously at his successor's antics being played on the screen. Then he turned back and continued shooting shirts into the crowd. By now, a good chunk of people were wearing green t-shirts. Go DKU. That was the message printed across them in bold black. He was feeling quite proud of his work. Unknown to him, the Aldera principal was looking over at the shirts through binoculars. Lowering them, he turned to his students and teachers. Retaliation inbound. Assume position C, he shouted. As one, the crowd moved to spell out another message. This one used alternating colors to look like it was flashing. Mizutafu cryptid. One message spelled out. Number 1 menace. The other one said. At the same time, the dance club rushed down to the front of the seats and started a lively dance retelling the shenanigans of middle school Midoriya. Yagi looked over and gasped. Oh no, they're choreographed. Right, firmer action was needed. He looked back to the boxes and pulled out a series of small drones sent from Melissa and David, both of whom had joined the Deku fan club. Hitting a few buttons, the drones lit up their green LED lights and flew up to create an image of a cartoon Deku with a thumbs up. Very PR-friendly. He put his hands on his hips and smugly looked over at Aldera. Despite Midoriya's penchant for claiming he was okay being useless, a wholly wrong fact in his opinion, no one would besmirch his boy while he was here. If it was a war they wanted, a war they'd get. Chapter 18. Yue loses 4 students, and somehow that's a good thing. Midoriya and his classmates came back into the stadium 40 minutes later to utter chaos. Drones hovered over the sky, recreating his face in LEDs. Aldera had brought out their band to conduct a full orchestra accompanied by a choir singing about his misadventures, and plushies and shirts of him were everywhere. Kaken smiled, almost fondly. Shit like this? It's kind of nostalgic. Izuku happily looked upon the scene, just like childhood. A boy in 1B, Monoma Nito, looked at them incredulously as he brought up the rear. The first student not from 1A to make it through. This reminds you of your childhood. Yuppers, this is really nice of them. Neither Kaken nor Izuku saw anything odd about this. Uraraka came over then, holding 1 cone of green cotton candy and 1 pink. Hey, look at this Deku. They have themed cotton candy for us, she cheerily said as she handed one over to him. Ooh, nice. Let's check out the keychain stall they've set up. Izuku chipped in, walking with her to the impromptu tourist attraction. No one noticed the look Todoroki got on his face as he watched All Might come out to give his loud and proud endorsement of a Go Deku t-shirt before the man quickly vanished into the stadium, only for a rarely seen UA staff member, Yagi Tashinori, to pop out soon after. Blue and gray eyes narrowed as the boy had a sudden itch to grab some red yarn. 0. Todoroki had disappeared after that, but just as his classmates were beginning to question where he was, the boy showed up just in time for the second event. "Oh hey, Todoroki, where were you?" Izuku asked. "I'll tell you later." Izuku blinked as he spotted a hint of red thread hidden in the boy's similarly colored hair. You have something there." He pointed at the yarn. Todoroki reached up, searching for a bit before plucking it from his hair. "Oh, thank you, Yagi-kun." "Wait, what?" "Oh, sorry. Do you prefer Mike-kun?" Izuku choked a little, bewildered. "I'm sorry, what's goi?" But then the announcement to head to the arena came over the waiting room speakers, and Izuku didn't get a chance to ask as they were herded outside. Now then, present Mike began once they all got out. Our normal competition would have hinged on who placed where in the first event, but seeing as our growing Hellions blew that plan out of the water, we have a special treat instead. All students not in 1A are to target the students in 1A. The first 16 students to knock out a 1A student from the ring may advance. But that's not all. After all, 1A needs a way to advance too. Those remaining 1A students can qualify if they are among the last 16 standing. The class could have collectively groaned. 42 students qualified for the second event. The fact that they had to eliminate 26 other students, including 4 of their own, now that was playing dirty, Nedzu. "How are we going to get out of this one?" Siro complained. Izuku had his chin in his hand, thinking hard on it. His answer came quickly, however, when he noticed Tokoyami and Dark Shadow out of the corner of his eye. Snapping his fingers, he looked up in realization. "I've got it." His classmates turned to him, looking at Izuku attentively. But he wasn't looking at them. Instead, his eyes were zeroing in on the students from the support courses. The techies. "I have a plan to get us all to the final round. We just need one of them." Plastering a friendly grin on his face, he marched over and waved. "Hey." Their heads whipped over to look at him. "Yeah, you. I've got a proposition." Perhaps they weren't quite as desensitized to the slightly manic look on his face as his 1A classmates were, as all of them scattered without a second look. Well, not all of them. One girl was left. Someone with pink hair that didn't even look up from where she was fiddling with her gadgets. Tapping her on the shoulder, her crosshair eyes snapped up to meet his. "Oh, hey. Just the person I needed to see. I've got an awesome idea." She started. "Whoa, so do I? I tell you mine, and you tell me yours." He asked amicably. She nodded. "Okay." He took a deep breath and tried to look serious. "I'm gonna need you to hack into UA's servers." She paused. "Huh. Did not expect that. I think that's the first time someone else's idea has been crazier than mine. But crazy is just another name for innovation, huh, Greenie?" She pushed on before he could respond. "I'll do it if your whole class advertises my babies," she said as she energetically patted her jetpack. Izuku looked back at his class, not at all subtly eavesdropping in. "That good with you guys?" Ida looked a little nervous. Isn't that the girl rumored to have half her inventions explode?" She waved them off. "Not half. Only 29.8%. Uraraka was eager and determined as she stepped up. "I'm willing to take the chance if this means we can all pass. Although, what does hacking into UA have to do with qualifying?" Izuku looked downright mischievous. "You'll see. Trust me, this is going to be great." After a small beat of hesitance, he got a grumbling of yes from the rest of his class. "Fantastic. Business partners it is," she exclaimed. "Here, now take this. My newest baby." Turning to the support student, he took the jetpack that she was shoving into his arms and strapped it on. Then she went to grab some of her other babies and pass them out. "So, sorry, I just realized I didn't ask your name," he admitted sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm Midoriya, by the way." She took it in stride. "Hatsum May, support course extraordinaire and future CEO of Hatsum Industries. Good to meet ya, Greenie." "Nice to meet you too, Hatsum. So how are you going to get into the UA servers?" "Really, He was taking a risk on this plan. As far as he knew, Nedzu was super smart. Wouldn't the stoat have crazy good encryption? She didn't even bat an eye at his question. Hatsum took her phone from her pocket, tapped a few buttons, then showed it to him. She was already in UA's files. There. Done. Izuka gaped. Behind him, his classmates were spluttering. How? She seemed rather nonchalant about it. Hacking into UA is a rite of passage for support students. It's even on the curriculum. We've been bugging UA's more unprotected servers since Mr. Stoat Principal's been here, and that was like 30 years ago. Easy peasy. Now then, why'd you have me do this? Izuku was practically bouncing in excitement. So it's not against the rules? Even better. Right. So, UA's enrollment files, can you access them? Hatsum tapped on a few files before showing him exactly what he needed. File upon file with all their information neatly available to him. Here you go. He grinned wide. Perfect. 0. He had explained everything to Hatsum in very quiet whispers so that no one would overhear what he was doing and let the teachers know in time to speedily update the charter. Not even 1A knew. Although that was more because he always enjoyed a good reveal. Then Present Mike ended his countdown, and the arena became a mad dash as dozens of students were on them. Their plan was still going as the second event, which had been termed the 1A Smackdown, began. So, while Hatsum worked on configuring their files while simultaneously promoting her products, Class 1A was tasked with shielding her from others. At first, they tried to escape their competition by taking to the air, but that quickly proved futile as 1B followed them. Without anyone noticing, it seemed like Monoma from Class 1B copied Uraraka's Quirk and Yanagi Reiko used her telekinesis. Working together, they'd replicated what Uraraka and Deku had managed to pull off, flight. After that, it quickly became an all-out aerial battle. Fortunately, Monoma was rapidly getting queasy and Yanagi had no idea how to soothe his symptoms like Izuka did. So it was hopefully just a matter of time until Monoma couldn't keep it up anymore. Izuka huffed as he decked a student from 1B with his telekinesis. No hard feelings. He shouted after them as they landed onto the ground, clearly outside of the ring. Then he turned to shove a business student out too. Greenie, Hatsum shouted, "You're up now." He nodded before flying over, this time by using his jetpack instead of his telekinesis. Bringing up the megaphone Yaoyorozu had created for her, the support student made her pitch, "And here I've got my precious baby, the patented Hatsum Jetpack 3.0. Izuku just about pulled Hatsum out of the way before a tangle of vines from Shiozaki wrapped around her and tried to hurdle her outside the ring. Rearing back his arm, he sent a telekinetically powered punch at the vines, blasting them away. He grimaced at the slight twinge of pain from his arm. Night Eye hadn't been kidding about the backlash. He might have been practicing every day since the attempted USJ attack, but 2 big uses of his quirk like this was giving him a migraine and more than a few body aches. Still, he did his best to duck out of the way of Rin Hiryu's attack, narrowly missing the scales being shot at him. Hatsum only laughed, eager as she presented the jetpack he was wearing. Look at how quickly it maneuvers. Full directional capabilities for all cardinal directions. Smooth vertical movement from my stabilization hardware and thermal cooling pre-installed. Give him a loop, Greenie. Investors will want to see the flashy stuff. Izuku could have turned a little green in the face as he forced himself to perform a corkscrew, then a barrel roll, then a dive. At the end of it, though, Hatsum approached on her own hydraulic attachments, which just seemed like fancy stilts to him. She leaned in and loudly whispered, not at all covert, "I've got everything in the files edited. You're good to go. Now I just have to show off the grappling hook I gave to the bird guy. All my babies need to shine, after all." He sighed in relief, half glad that their plan was moving along and half glad that his turn to advertise was over. 0. When everything was said and done, UA's very own Class 1A were the last ones standing. It had been pretty easy to knock out 1B once their flight had failed, either because Monoma had hit his time limit for copy or just because he felt a growing urge to lose his breakfast on the ground. Once that was over, Hatsum spent another 10 minutes showcasing everything before stepping off the field herself. In any case, 20 students stood in the ring and no one made a move to tackle the others out. And that leaves 20 left to go. Present Mike announced. But they don't seem to be moving. What's this? A rousing protest. Aizawa grumbled over the speakers. They'll all be suspended if they break the rules any further. Midoriya chuckled as he took the megaphone Hatsum had handed him. Actually, he began. Oh dear God. He heard Aizawa-sensei mutter. The rules state that only 16 students can advance. Now, if you'll check your enrollment files, please, he said, almost as if he were a magician asking someone to check their pockets. A short silence followed before a new voice chipped in. Well, more like cackled. Ah, I see now. Their principal stated from his place up in the announcement box. Just then, the stadium screen changed to display UA's enrollment files, with their full names and private details blacked out, of course. And right there, in the school's very own files, was 4 students who just happened to have sentient quirks like Tokoyami's. Izuku could hear quite a few gasps from Class 1A as the smarter of them caught on and told the rest. Uraraka quickly bounded up to him, linked their arms, and hastily gestured at the other students to do the same. Aoyama paired up with Denki, Shoji paired up with Azui, and Hagakure paired up with Jiro. You see, Midoriya stated, I'm not actually a student now. At least, I won't be for the next 24 hours before the database reboots. I'm just my classmate's sentient quirk, Green Shadow. Everyone in 1A looked from him and then over to a certain bird-themed classmate. Tokoyami put his head in his hands. Izuku figured he'd be blushing if they could see that. Dark Shadow, in comparison, preened at the attention. That cannot be within the rules. Present Mike said, for the first time quiet as he was actually stumped. On the contrary, Nedzu spoke up, sounding entirely amused. UA purposefully allows students to practice white hat hacking by infiltrating UA's low-security servers. This clause was made with support students in mind, but effectively applies to every student. And as our definition of student relies entirely on our enrollment forms, well, it appears that all 16 students will advance to the final round. Quietly, away from the microphone and unheard, Principal Nedzu looked on with approval. Good job, Midoriya. Good job. Down in the stadium, Izuku beamed. Aldra cheered.